Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and joining me, as always, the MVP of the Great Dairy Apocalyptic Rock Fight of 1958, it's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
Got a piece of shale in one hand, got a piece of granite in the other. I'm ready to go.
Which would be better to throw of those two things? I don't know, rocks.
I think probably granite. It's
Probably.
it's pretty dense.
With the shale, is shale the one that flakes?
Yeah. Well,
I don't think good.
granite's metamorphic. Shale's sedimentary. It'll shatter. So.
Is this the worst introduction we've ever done?
We're
talking about rocks.
You want to look for the metamorphic rocks in a rock fight, folks.
This week, our 19-part coverage of Stephen King's It continues with part 9, covering chapters 12 through 13. We wrap up part 3, Grown-Ups, as 3 additional characters make their way to Derry: Bill's wife, Audra, Bev's husband, Tom, and of course, our old friend, Henry Bowers. Then, after a quick trip back into the late 20s to see the massacre of the Bradley Gang, we move back to July 1958 and see our 7-man band finally come together for the first time. It's a rock-throwing good time, Matt. What you think of this week's reading?
Well, I think this is my favorite week of reading so far.
Wow.
I mean, basically, I think I finished chapter 12, the first basically third of our reading, and I texted you like, wow, really good stuff in the reading this week. I can't wait to talk about it. And then I honestly was like, oh, there's more. and then I listened to the rest, and like each of the subsequent entire sections was also amazing.
My assumption when I got that message from you was that you had finished it and you were talking about the rock fight, but that was just after chapter 12. Wow.
Yeah, I was talking about the just intensity of the Henry Bowers stuff and the piece of shit Tom Rogan stuff. And the Audrey stuff was very unique and interesting. That's all I was talking about. So basically, just a whole week of stuff that just amazed me and kind of ramped up and up and up. I really loved it.
That's awesome. Can't wait to talk about it with you. I agree with you. Moving into this week had me really excited. I love the July of 1958 section of the book. It has some of my absolute favorite stuff in it. So I'm so glad you're enjoying it.
Awesome.
Let's get into it. Before we do that, though, we got a couple of announcements. One of them, a few of our listeners might have been waiting for some time.
Yeah.
Now, what are we announcing?
So voting over on the patreon.com/doofmedia is currently open for the Do the King Thing number 2 fiction contest.
No shit.
If you'll recall, it's a contest where you try to write a fairly short story, kind of aiming for the style of Stephen King, kind of aiming for the subject matter of Stephen King, kind of trying to sound like Stephen King. That was the idea. And look, we're gonna aim for just the appropriate level of self-flagellation here. Not too much, not too little. We dropped the ball on this.
It's literally been a year.
So, the first time we did this, we felt like we made the voting process horribly complicated. And we felt like we did everybody a disservice that way. So we said to ourselves and each other and you, we're going to simplify the voting process. We're going to filter out the stories first. We're going to go through a pass where we on our side are going to filter the stories. You're only going to end up voting on the top 10 by our assessment.
Yeah.
And we didn't really think through how much effort that would take or how horrible it would feel to disappoint everyone who didn't get selected. So that's our excuse, such as it is.
Yeah, effort, I think, definite anxiety and it. I think you described this as both of our Achilles heels being nailed at the exact same time.
Yeah.
Which is that we don't like disappointing people. I mean, part of the entire idea of having the contest be patron voted is an incentive for people to be patrons, yes, but also to push the responsibility off of us. And yeah, we didn't quite think through uh the amount of time and work and it would this is all our way to saying we are acknowledging that this is our bad, we messed up. Maybe third time's a charm with this, and when we plan for our third version of the contest, we will have come up with a system that actually works for us, because obviously we're not happy with this one either, at least on the time end. I mean, the stories themselves, the one constant through this whole thing, Matt, is the stories themselves have just been incredible across the board.
Yeah. 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 We're definitely not going to do it this way again. We may just go
Yeah,
back to something similar to the previous way because at
we
least
might.
that was
Yeah,
done in a timely fashion.
we might have to. I don't know. We've got to figure it out for sure. But the problem is y'all are too good at if like 90% of y'all were just like really bad at writing, it would make this a lot easier.
Yeah.
So maybe think about that next time.
Yeah. Yeah. That would help, honestly.
Anyway, the point is that Matt, as Matt said, the voting is open right now. We're going to leave that open for a month because it's 10 stories and it took us a year to read 50. So we figure it'll take y'all about a month to read 10. And I think we're going to probably have to do some runoffs after the initial round of voting, because there's 10 is still a lot. It's still a lot to have in a poll where you can only choose one. And unfortunately, Patreon still does not let us have a choose 2 or choose 3 option. I hate Patreon's poll system so much, but that's what we have to do it. So we'll probably have runoffs for the most popular ones. So please, please, please don't be like us. Go out there right now, read the 10 stories if you're a patron, and pick your favorite, and we'll do it. I promise that before the show is over, we will have announced a winner for this contest.
Yeah, the hard part's over. So
yeah. Yep. All right, one more quick announcement. We just wanted to remind y'all that the Bangor Live survey is still going on. The response has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you, everyone who has submitted that. We actually just got off a meeting we were having earlier today, right before we started recording, about the plans and how everything's going, and folks were really excited. We are ecstatic. Things are shaping up really good. I think we've confirmed our guest. I don't think we're going to make that announcement right this very minute, but I think we've got our guest confirmed, and I can't wait to share that with y'all. And man, it's going to be a great time. So if you for some reason haven't filled out the survey yet and are interested in coming to Bangor with us in June, it's at doofmedia.com/Bangor survey. This just gives us some information. I think the goal of the survey has been accomplished. I think we were talking about we've gotten enough feedback to know that there's a lot of people very excited about this, which means we're doing it, and we're doing it big. It's going to be awesome. So everyone look forward to that. We will have more announcements on when tickets are going to be on sale and everything in the coming months, but it's going to be big.
Yep. That being said, if you do want to go, then I do suggest you fill out the survey. That just helps us get a little bit more accuracy in our scoping. But yeah, it's going to be awesome.
I guess I shouldn't have announced the keep filling out the survey. Disregard what I said and keep filling out the survey. If only to win a copy of Stephen King's Holly, which we will be giving 3 away once the survey is closed in mid-September.
The drawing of the 3.
Yeah.
Is a joke that I just thought up.
A Doof Media original. No, we stole that from someone on Reddit. That's a joke. In case you missed that last week.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it for the announcements. Let's get into it, Matt. We got a lot of pages to cover and a lot of really good stuff to talk about. So let's begin with chapter 12, 3 uninvited guests. And before we get into those specific guests, Matt, did this surprise you? Did any of this surprise you that, these characters are going to be coming back into the story in some way as at the adult versions? What do you think?
Well, I actually thought that Henry Bowers, let me rephrase. I was surprised Henry Bowers hadn't shown up yet, because I was like, well, he's clearly like being set up as the major antagonist. So I actually just assumed he was dead by this point. I was like, okay, since he hasn't shown up in the story yet, he must have died in the in the kid timeline. Otherwise, he would have already been in the story. And then it turns out, no, he's not dead. He's just in a mental institution, um, sort of set aside. And
Yeah.
here he comes. And pacing wise, this actually works really well, to wait until now to reintroduce him as an adult.
Yeah, I agree. What about Tom and Audra? Did you expect them to come back?
Well, yeah, I expected Tom to come back. I wasn't sure what form that would take exactly. It
Mm-hmm.
seems like it's taking a very basically he's just going to be an antagonist who's in the mix now. I did not expect Audra. I did that just seemed kind of the least predictable to me,
This is
out
this is
of
good because
anybody.
I was worried I laid it on a little thick when the book said, and Bill told Audra to definitely not come, and she definitely listened to him. I was worried that I spoiled it for you, but I guess not. Or maybe doing that threw you off the scent because you're like, well, surely Scott wouldn't just say that. Ha!
Yeah,
I gotcha.
I think it just didn't occur to me. I think because he's not the only character with connections back home, and I didn't necessarily see it as being obvious that she would follow him to Derry, whereas like Eddie's wife, for example, wouldn't. Um,
Yeah, fair.
but I think now in retrospect, it's like, well, Audra seems like a much more kind of proactive character than Eddie's wife. So
Sure. No, that's
um,
fair. That's fair. All right. Well, let's talk about Henry because we get to be inside the head of our hero, Henry Bowers.
I love him. I love King villains, as you're aware.
Yeah.
So this is a real
Mhm.
treat.
Yeah, and as you said, we meet up with middle-aged Henry in the place that he spent the last 20 years, or give or take, of his life, Juniper Hill, an institute for the criminally insane. And this is where King does that absolutely textbook magic trick where he goes, "And now I shall make you sympathize for someone you hate."
Uh huh.
And he does it. He does it with me because I kind of feel a little bit bad for poor Henry Bowers at the end of this section.
Yeah. I totally agree. We're doing some really, really interesting stuff with Henry
Hmm.
Bowers throughout this whole week's reading. I think.
Yeah,
Um, I didn't realize that he ended up in the mental institution. Maybe that was revealed at some point, but if so, I
I don't
didn't
think
catch
so.
it.
No.
Um, and so I kind of, did expect him to come back in the story, but like seeing how miserable his life is, how far he's fallen in life, um, like it makes you have sympathy for him, and it also kind of makes you realize like, oh, he's not only is he like not over what happened with the Losers Club, but he's been that's been festering for him for 20 years. So this is going to get really bad when
Yeah. Yeah.
when he gets out.
Yeah, and we get to learn kind of the book fills us in with everything. I think you're so right to point out that like maybe the assumption that Henry died because it seems like everyone in Henry's gang died in 1958, right? We know that Belch died, we know that Victor Chris died. We got reference to another character named Patrick Hochstetter that has also died. But not Henry. Nope, not Henry. And we learn here that the reason he's in prison is because in the fall of 1958, he killed his father. And then all of the other murders in Derry over the past year were basically blamed on him. I love the line here blame needed to be taken. Perhaps that was why he had been spared. And this is a lot, right? There's a lot here with Henry basically being saddled with everything Pennywise has done in
Yeah.
this particular cycle.
Yeah, I found that whole section incredibly interesting. The where we sort of flash back to him as this like 11-year-old kid being sort of bullied and brutalized by the police, and forced to take the rap for all this stuff, and
Yeah.
him just like taking it because he was so mentally traumatized by what happened with Pennywise.
Yeah.
I just thought it was really interesting how it's obviously totally implausible that this kid, this like child, would have murdered all these children and like flawlessly disposed of the bodies and left no forensic evidence except for like two minor things, right?
Yeah.
That one of which was planted by Pennywise, the other was just totally circumstantial and easily explained. Um, but just that the adults were just so ready and willing to just make it go away and to pretend that it made sense that they just pinned it on him.
Yeah, I mean, it does show, dairy being dairy, right? This very traditional desire to move on from something,
Yeah.
to move away from something. And so yeah, here we have a perfect out. We have a child. I don't think he's 11. I think Henry's a little bit older than the other kids because he was held back for a few years. So I think he's probably closer to 13 at this point, but still, a child.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's a fair point, but I still think there's a lot this week that's reminding us that he is a kid, that he is, um, I mean, when he was a kid, obviously, when all this stuff happened, he was a kid. He was just a he's just a poor kid who's being treated like shit by the world around him, and it makes you feel empathy, and we'll see that as we go.
Yeah, and that's God. This is what I love about King villains here in a character like this. Because what I love about them is I don't think King ever lets them off the hook. Right? It's not like Henry is not responsible for the bad things that he has done. Right? He clearly is, and the book holds him to that responsibility. But it also always takes pains to understand where this stuff comes from. We'll see this more back in 58 when we spend some time showing what Henry's father did to him. Right? Um, but I love how King does this, and it got me thinking. I think I messaged you this a couple weeks ago. I recently listened to a podcast. The Talking Scared podcast just did an interview with King. Really good interview, by the way. You should listen to it if you haven't already. And one of the things they talked about is I think he was asking, King about kind of his worldview. And one of the things he said that I think lines up with a lot of things that you and I have said about him is that he genuinely believes that most people in the world are good, most people in the world are smart, most people in the world are kind, and that the world is in generally a good place. And I think that matches with the optimist King you and I have talked about. But it also makes me look at King's books and how King writes evil. And it's just, oh, everything he's done in his entire career has been an effort to reconcile this earnestly held belief he has that the world is good, that people are kind and smart, and the reality of the world we live in, that people do horrible, monstrous things all the fucking time. And that's the Stephen King oeuvre is trying desperately to reconcile these two things. So of course it makes sense that you have a villain like Henry Bowers here who is a bad person, but we need to understand why he's a bad person. And also sometimes it comes from the parents, but sometimes it comes from this imperceptible extra, like the prim, what have you, supernatural evil that just exists, right? It's all, I think, part and parcel of this desperate attempt to reconcile these two ideas.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, the obvious connection in my mind is the idea of the devil, Satan, what have you. The idea that there's this uh, notion in our broader culture that like there's an actual source of evil in the world that goes around tempting people and nudging people and doing all these things, and I think I think that King is struggling to incorporate that idea in a way that feels more um I don't know, plausible or
Mm-hmm.
natural, because I've always found the idea of like, oh, there's a devil. I've never, even when I was a kid, I never found that compelling. But like
Yeah.
literally, even when I was a kid, I was like, it doesn't make sense. But
But don't you,
yeah.
isn't it wonderful that I know exactly what you mean, but like if you honestly and earnestly believe people are good at their core,
Hmm.
then isn't the devil or the prim or the Crimson King like the perfect explanation for why that's not true sometimes? It's like
Yeah.
I need something to explain why that's clearly not true many times.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I like about it. I agree. It's kind of a more adult and serious look at the idea of where does evil come from.
Hmm.
And that's why I like so many of his books that are not supernatural,
Yeah. Hmm.
because it's not he still has evil in those books, but it's like what happens here where Henry's dad is traumatized by a war, and then
Yeah.
uh, uh c- you know comes home and takes that out on his son, and
Hmm.
then his son goes forward into his life, and yeah, there's an evil clown that comes up at some point, but it's not like Henry would have had a great life without that either. So
Sure, sure.
it's just tragic, really.
I want to circle back to something you said, which I think is great. That like there was all this circumstantial evidence for why Henry was responsible for these crimes. Like he had, I think, Patrick Coxeter's belt in his room, and then also he had the underwear of one of the girls that went missing. And like you said, that evidence was planted in his room by Pennywise,
Hmm.
and that's interesting, right? Because why the fuck does the clown care? Who takes responsibility for this stuff, right?
Yeah,
But he seems to have specifically went out of his way to ensure that Henry Bowers will get these crimes pinned on him.
it's very strange. It's very interesting because it's like how many times we've or at least I've remarked before, like it's interesting when Pennywise does things that seem likely to just be pure hocus pocus and illusion versus when
Hmm.
he is clearly a monster who is present in the room and can actually kill you. Like there seem I could go through each scene of this story so far and be like, yeah, either actually killed somebody or almost killed somebody and they barely escaped versus like, yeah, he just kind of stood there and tried to scare them and they got away and it was obvious they were going to get away.
Sure.
Like there's a pretty clear demarcation. So it's like, but then here's like this whole other thing where you just imagine Pennywise like traipsing into the house and pulling the underwear out of his pocket and poking it in the mattress and looking around with his little
Yeah.
clown face. It's like it's very
Haha.
strange. Yeah.
No one will ever pin this crime on me, Pennywise. I have
Yeah.
framed this boy.
I mean, exactly. What a strange thing to do. Cause cl- like, like why, why, why,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, it's
I mean,
interesting.
I think it is kind of just like a manifestation of the central idea of nobody wants to actually look at the actual main problem here, and perhaps this is gesturing towards that Pennywise has actively fostered that kind of behavior and environment by like poking his nose into it and pushing towards like, yes, you want to blame this one child on this entire thing, even though, as you said, that's completely unreasonable and basically impossible. And I'm sure he has alibis for many of the murders. But it's more fun and it's better if Derry kind of perpetuates this thing and doesn't actually ever look at any of their problems. And so here, I'll help. I'll help with that. There you go.
Yeah, sure. You'd see him as being, supernaturally not just the thing that does the violence, but also the thing that covers for the violence.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, I mean, we talk about it already, but Henry's life is so sad, man. Like, obviously, he gestures towards the thing that he saw in the tunnels under Derry that day in the fall of 1958, that killed two of his friends. Um, and it, as you said, it has completely fucked him up, completely irreparably fucked him up. And I love this detail that he's lived this life, this sad, lonely, angry life, but like he's also like never gotten into trouble really. Like he's just kind of living and I mean doing the best he can in this place. But the one time he got in trouble is because someone turned off his nightlight. Someone turned off his Donald Duck nightlight, which will allow the terrors of the dark to get in, and that he loses it, and that's the one time he gets in trouble. So like, is this guy who I think it's really interesting that King shows us the people that he shares this place with Juniper Hill. Like we see rapists, we see monsters, we see cannibals, right? Um, and then Henry, a child, basically. I think that the choice of the nightlight is perfect, right? Because it shows that he's kind of still perpetually child Henry Bowers, and this has been his life.
And he's been dominated by fear his whole life,
Yep, yep,
which is an idea that we've seen over and over in King's work. That the worst evil is often motivated by fear.
yeah,
People acting out of a feeling that they have to do this because something horrible will happen if they don't, and
yeah,
that's exactly what's happening here. I mean, as we'll see in this chapter, the evil literally tells him, you've got to do this for me. Um, yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. it's so interesting though, because like he is a bad kid,
Yeah. Oh
but
yeah. Oh yeah.
but like Pennywise, he didn't deserve to be like mentally shattered by Pennywise.
No.
And I guess all of this, it helps kind of recontextualize things, because like he has no crew of fellow losers to help him share the load, to share the burden
Hmm.
of the supernatural horror. He has no supernatural turtle watching out for him to try to help him.
Yeah.
He's just on his own, and so yeah, you do feel kind of bad for him.
Yeah. Yeah. So we see, Matt, that right after Mike calls the losers, Pennywise makes his own call via the moon collect, I guess, to Henry. Like he starts talking to him via the moon. He starts messing with him. He starts goading him into old angers and old hatreds. I don't know. I think you're absolutely right that like the events of his childhood have like had this never ending impact on Henry Bowers. But I don't know. I kind of got the feeling that, and maybe I'm completely off base here. Like maybe he hasn't thought about the losers club kids in a while. Like he lives in fear of Pennywise. He lives in fear of what he saw under there, and he blames them on some level for that. But maybe he hasn't thought about them very much in a while. He's just this guy living his life in this prison. And then Pennywise comes back, and he puts on the voice of all these kids, and he goads him, and he triggers him, and he just like forces him back into this anger, this rage, this hatred. And saying, they're all coming back, Henry, and you have to go kill them. You have to do this for me. I don't know. It's just sad. It's just sad.
Yeah, I actually agree. I mean, I think that's a really astute observation, that it's not like he is the kind of villain who is just sitting there glowering and simmering and carving the names of all the losers into his, skin with a jagged piece of glass or something. Like it's
Hmm.
that's not what we got here. He just wants to be left alone,
Yeah.
and live his life to the extent possible in a mental institution. And yeah, I totally agree that it required Pennywise to come and poke those old wounds, and maybe he can get him good and mad once he kind of reminds him or frames things for him. But
Yeah.
I think you're right. That's one of the many things I think that are aligned to make us see Henry as more of a victim, because he would have just lived out his life and possibly never hurt anyone else ever again if he had just been left alone. But
Yeah. I mean, he would have probably just spent the rest of his life in this mental institution.
yeah,
And just
yeah,
kind of lived. And I mean, like, it doesn't help that King also takes the time to show us that this place sucks, that the guards in this place suck, and they're like mean. Like the detail that they're not allowed billy clubs, so they just bring rolls of quarters and just hit people on the back of the neck and head with them. It's like, what the fuck, man? It's awful.
yeah, and that they like gave a guy brain damage
Yeah.
at one
Uh huh.
point.
Uh
Yeah,
huh.
it's really bad. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. So later that night, as Henry sits in his bed thinking about the voices, his nightlight burns out, and Victor Chris appears, who's super dead. Vic wants Henry to get out of Juniper Hill and head down to Derry. And before we get into Vic, I do have to just take it aside here and say that Henry observes that the guard on duty that night is Kuntz, the worst one he's described.
Uh-huh.
Which is this just King like taking a specific dig out at Dean Koontz? I think so.
I don't know when Dean Koontz started publishing his stuff that was, highly
That's a good
reminiscent of
question.
King stuff, but
That's a
it
good
is kind of
question.
funny.
I feel like I don't know. I feel like they're of similar age, so I assumed they started publishing at about the same time. But that's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know. I
Oh
have no
yeah,
idea.
he's definitely been Koontz has been writing since the 70s. So
Yeah, it's
this
probably
is
probably.
an intentional Koontz dig.
Yep, 100%. 100%. We got a feud going on here.
But also, we learn here that Koontz eats peanut butter and onion sandwiches, which this is wild.
Uh-huh.
This is the second time a nemesis of Henry. First, we have Mike Hanlon, and now we have guard Dean Koontz eating peanut butter and onion sandwiches.
Yeah, this is
What's going
getting
on here?
This is getting out of hand. We need to figure this out. This seems important.
I swear to God, if there's a third peanut butter and onion sandwich reference, I'm gonna lose my mind.
Yeah,
I don't even remember if there is, but if there is, I'm losing my mind.
I agree. I'm gonna have to try it. I'm sorry. Like it's
Some
I
of our
can't
listeners
handle it.
said it was good, man. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not joking. I'm gonna do it.
So Matt, Pennywise, who is obviously Vic, explains the situation to Henry. He says they're coming back. He says they can't hurt me if they only half believe, Vic said. But there have been some distressing signs, Henry. We didn't think they could beat us back then either.
I love it
Ooh.
when King throws a massive bombshell like this in the middle of a bunch of other stuff that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's this huge concept, this admission that the degree of belief of the victim plays a role in whether they can serve as prey or be hurt by
Mm-hmm.
the clown, and it plays into the idea that children can be hurt, but maybe adults can't. Um, there's all kinds of interesting implications if you take this literally.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And then we have the thing we have to admit here now, Matt, is that the all powerful shape shifting monster clown is now summoning a middle aged, mentally unwell person to help him defeat a group of middle aged adults.
uh-huh.
Just incredible,
Yeah,
incredible. I think this kind of serves to confirm everything we felt back in the last chapter, right? That this was less about Pennywise like going for the losers during their walking tours, and more him kind of cautiously feeling them out a little bit.
yeah,
And I think it's important to say this line here, this scene happens, I believe, before like the walking tours have actually occurred. I think this happens the night basically that Mike Hamlin makes his calls. This is all happening. So the losers have not gone to Derry yet. The walking tours have not happened yet. So you gotta know if he was worried at this point. Do you think the walking tours made our monster antagonists more confident or less?
probably less. I suspect strongly he feels less confident. I don't think, victory is assured for our heroes by any
Mm-hmm.
means, because I guess one way of thinking about this is like their defenses might be stronger because they're all adults, but also I think that their weapons are weaker because they don't
Mm-hmm.
have like the clear childlike faith of a young child that they can wield as a supernatural weapon the way that often king characters do. Um, so I don't really know. I think I still don't know how it shakes out, but yeah, definitely recontextualizes those previous interactions.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it does in a fun way where like we were both getting this feeling that like I think that the Ben one is such a perfect one where like why is he just standing up there like just like making fun of him? What are you
Yeah,
doing? Attack him. What are you doing?
right. Yeah, I mean, I think on the whole, the fact that he, as you just indicated, the fact that he is needing to recruit Henry Bowers in the first place suggests that the level of like danger and threat that he poses is very often just, as Bill is going to sort of indicate later, a glamour.
Yeah.
He takes the
Yeah.
form of a giant because that's scary, not because he can actually, you know, chase people in the form of a giant. It's
Mhm.
just intimidating. Um,
Yeah.
so
So this section ends with Pennywise taking care of the guard and Henry is free and on his way to Derry. Oh no.
awesome. I just want to say that I love the idea that the guard's mortal fear is just a dog.
Yeah, but it's great, but it does do something that I think we get reinforced a couple more times in this week's reading, Matt. This idea that Pennywise might not like be in control of what he transforms into and could possibly be multiple things simultaneously. Like we get this idea here where one of Henry's cellmates, I think, looks at Pennywise and sees his mom, right? And that's what
Yeah.
like freaks him out. And then simultaneously at the same time, the guard looks at Pennywise and sees I think it's a German Shepherd or
Yeah, I
I
think
forget
so.
what type of dog it is, but like, and sees the head of a just on a clown body, which is really great.
Yeah.
And then I think we get this reinforced a little bit later, where in the Bradley gang shootout, where everyone is seeing Pennywise hold a different gun, and then I think even the losers talk about it, where Richie saw a werewolf because Richie was afraid of werewolves, but when Bill looked at Pennywise, he didn't see a werewolf. There was no werewolfness going on there. He just saw the clown. So just more kind of information about like the actual logistics of how it works.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think that's so interesting that he doesn't just control, or maybe he can control it. It's hard to say, but yeah, in the moment he takes on the form of the fear, of the greatest
Hmm.
fear of the person who is looking at him, um, which I guess it has all kinds of implications, because like, well, if you can control your emotional state, does that mean you can make yourself functionally immune to him? I don't know. That
Hmm.
might be a little too far, but maybe.
Yeah, maybe. So from here, Matt, we move over to Bev's friend Kay. As horrifying as this part of the book is, which it absolutely is, Matt, I kind of love how this is structured. We jump back in with Kay, and it's a few pages before we understand what is going on here. Like she ends up looking into a mirror at some point, and she's beaten up, and we're like, what happened? What the fuck happened? And we learn, of course, that Tom showed up and beat her up to try to get information. And so we begin the section with her after all of this, sitting there trying to decide if she wants to call the police on Tom or not.
Yeah, this section made me real mad, Scott. I got real
Yeah,
mad.
I don't blame you for that one.
It was very upsetting.
Yeah, oh, for sure. We see in the section Kay's trip to the hospital and to the attending who tries to convince her that she needs to get the cops involved. And I love this writing here. This thought was followed by another, one she suspected her friend Beverly must have had more than once, that the worst of the beating took place inside, where you were apt to suffer something that might be called interspiritual bleeding. She knew what she looked like, yes. Worse still, she knew what she felt like. She felt yellow. It was a dismal feeling. I really love this. I love that King took the time to do this. I think, Bev has this friend named Kay, and it's very easy to look at Bev's situation from Kay's angle and from our perspective as well, and just go, hey, why don't you just leave him? Just leave this guy. What the hell are you doing? Why are you behaving like this? Why are you acting like this? But Bev has 30 years or give or take of mental conditioning going against her here. And none of this is easy. None of this is simple. And it isn't until Kay kind of gets a quick flash of what Bev goes through on a daily basis that she can really understand this. She can really understand the actual the shame and the embarrassment that goes on from this kind of thing. That it's not easy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's very interesting that we get to look at it from her perspective, right? And we see the damage that somebody like Tom does, not just physically, and not just to his own wife, but spiritually, and to everyone connected to his victim. So, like, she Kay has been suffering, secondhand due to what's been happening
Yeah.
to Bev. And now we see that what is, yeah, she's physically banged up, but it's actually this feeling of shame that
Hmm.
is, I think, smarting the most right now.
Yeah.
It's just, I think that's just an incredibly poignant statement about the real damage that people like Tom do in the world.
Yeah. And why it's sometimes so confusing looking in on that from the outside and being like, well, why don't you just leave him? It's like,
Yeah.
well, you don't understand. You don't understand how much this fucks with a person's head.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Kay, from here, we cut back to Kay's encounter with Tom, who pretends to be a flower delivery man and breaks in, demanding to know where Bev is. Kay holds strong against the beating for a while, but when Tom threatens to cut up her face, she finally relents and tells Tom that Bev has gone home to Derry. He says if she calls the cops, he'll come back and finish the job, and then takes off, leaving Kay beaten and trying to decide what to do next. Horrifying scene.
Yeah.
Absolutely horrifying.
Yeah, I did find it incredibly horrifying. Like, somehow even more so than Tom beating his wife. And I don't know why, cuz that, like, all things considered, they were similarly savage acts of violence.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really. I'm actually kind of curious to introspect on why it. I think it just was. It's like it's like, yeah. Well, Tom has like he's the kind of guy who beats his wife. That's like a thing that I can put in a box. It's kind of like when the Joker is in the Dark Knight is like, horrible things happen, but as long as it's like a normal kind of horrible thing happening, that's fine. It's all part of the plan.
Sure.
I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but then Tom loses it, flies off the handle, and attacks this complete other woman. That's just beyond the pale. I mean, I'm trying to figure out like why I was so like incensed by this specifically.
Yeah.
Um,
I,
I don't
I
know.
wonder if I wonder if part of it is because of the kind of the complicated way King builds that initial Tom beats up Bev sequence where it starts with him like kind of beating the shit out of her and then like verbally abusing her, but that ends with them having sex, right? And it builds this really complicated relationship that Bev has with sex and violence in this whole relationship, and that leaves you kind of unsettled and not sure how to feel about all this stuff. Whereas perhaps the K beating is just kind of more straightforward. This guy is awful, and that's all there is to it. Like, you know,
Yeah. That's a great point, and you've tickled something else in my mind, which is simply that much of the Bev chapter is actually from Tom's point of view,
yeah,
and you're constantly hearing his refrain of self justifications and bullshit, whereas this is all from Kay's point of view as she's just minding her own goddamn business, and this guy kicks down her door, and it just makes it feel different that it's literally just situated in a different point of view.
yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah. So Kay can't decide what to do about the cops, but she can warn Bev, she decides. So she attempts to do so, leaving a message with the hotel. But of course, we have not seen Bev get this message, at least not yet. Hopefully, she will before she sees Tom. And from here, we cut over to Tom. We're back in his head again. Yay. He's flying towards Derry. He's holding a Bill Denbrough novel in his lap and reading the author insert over and over and over again. And he's decided that, oh, he's married to this woman Audra. Oh, didn't Bev and I see this movie and I say that Audra looks exactly like Bev? And Bev was like, no, she doesn't. And Tom has convinced himself that they totally did. Just like totally normal dude stuff.
Uh-huh. Yeah, very normal behavior. Very cool. Um, yeah, I mean, once again, I really love when King brings us into the heads of like these guys who are just like the normal kind of crazy, not like hallucinating, but just like having a severe personality disorder. Nothing supernatural happening here. No hallucinations. No real excuses or mitigating circumstances. He just is this way. In stark contrast to Henry Bowers, who you know, is being preyed upon by a evil demonic clown and also had this horrible father and is just, you know, has had this horrible life that has just broken him.
Yeah.
Nah, Tom is just this way. This is just who he is. He's just a piece
Well,
of
he did have
shit.
a shitty father
He had his
also.
shitty, and I guess he had a, but even that was kind of played. I don't know, man. Like, yeah, that was in there, but it's like, okay, but he's choosing to double down on it,
Sure. Sure.
in a way
Yeah.
that makes me. I think we're intentionally meant to contrast Henry and Tom and be like, oh, weird. The
Yeah.
supernaturally evil guy is less evil than just the guy.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. It is interesting that, like, obviously, Pennywise wants Henry to come to Derry. We don't know how Pennywise feels about Audra one way or another. But like Tom being in Derry certainly ain't bad for him, but he's not seemingly involved in any of this stuff,
Right. So
which is
far.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So from here, Tom's section ends with him landing in Bangor, buying a car, stealing some license plates, and making his way towards Derry. We end Tom with him crazily buying a pack of cigarettes and deciding that he's going to make Bev eat every single one because somehow this is still about the time that she smoked.
Uh-huh.
Somehow, like, it's just a perfect way to describe the mind of someone who has just gone completely off the deep end,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it's like he wants to gain back a sense of control. And in his
Yeah,
mind, it's like, this is about the cigarettes. This is about the
yeah,
cigarettes. And for Bev, it's like, what? No, we're doing a whole different thing over here. Just leave me
yeah.
alone. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and it lines up too with his obsession with Bill, right? Like this man that loves my wife, possibly,
yeah,
even though they haven't seen each other in 27 years, and she's coming here to see him, and it all becomes not this promise she had to do. It's just about another man because he sees just women as prey, and it's like, oh, there's another predator, and I have to assert my dominance, and I'll take this guy out too. Um,
yeah.
it's horrifying.
I think making her eat the cigarettes is simultaneously, obviously deranged, but it's also sort of childish. Like it's the
Yeah,
sort of punishment that an adult might inflict on a child if they catch smoking cigarettes, or even a child at the dinner table misbehaving. You're going to be like, eat every bite of that dinner. It, it immediately evoked the idea of like a childish sort of sense of justice that he was going to
yeah.
make her eat the cigarettes.
I like this a lot because I think that's something we can say has a connection to Henry as well, who has
Yeah,
kind of stopped aging,
yeah,
like mentally, I think. And so we have these two villains who are behaving a little childishly, which links perfectly with Pennywise, who we said I think last week, seems very childish himself, right?
yeah.
This idea of there's power in childhood. Certainly, the losers have that, but that there's also evil in childishness as
Yeah.
well.
Well, and it's like sorry to spoil every single Stephen King book, but whenever you finally corner the evil in these stories and pull down their pants, they reveal themselves to be ridiculous and
Hmm.
and pathetic and fundamentally childish in all sorts of ways.
Hmm.
There's like no exceptions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, that's great. It's a great point. Great point. So from here, we move over to Audra, who, if you will recall, Matt, Bill specifically told not to come to Derry.
uh-huh.
Well, she's coming to Derry.
Okay. For
I
Audra.
do I do find this section of the book really fascinating because we have Henry, we have this kind of shocking turn of, oh, Henry's still alive and he's coming back. Oh, here we go. And then we have, oh, it's awful Tom and we have to live through this horrible horrible thing he does to Kay, and oh, he's coming back in the story. Uh-oh. And then a lot of Audra's chapter is her wrestling with the producer of the movie, Frankie, and wrestling with herself about kind of what this is going to mean for her future and her career. She talks with Frankie and he basically tells her, Bill's departure we can cover. He's the writer. Like, if we need him to make some changes, we can just, make them ourselves or delay that part. But if she were to leave, the actress, the star, that would ruin everything. And the implication here, Frankie doesn't ever come right out and say it, but the implication here is that it could ruin her too. It could at least derail her career for quite a bit. And that's a lot of what this chapter is this part right here.
I mean, I became surprisingly invested in Audra's career by the end of this. I was like, no, Audra, don't do it.
Yeah.
You'll ruin your career and also probably be eaten by a clown. But like your acting career, it's this movie is gonna be the guy is gonna be so disappointed. Freddie's gonna be so disappointed in you. I was into it, man. I love it.
Hmm. Yeah. I called him Frankie, but his name's Freddie. I don't know why I did
I
that.
don't.
I do love this time where Freddie says, "Have a care, love. Don't do something you'll regret later." And then King writes, "She felt the force of his personality beating on her, demanding that she give in, make the promise, do her job, wait passively for Bill to come back, or to disappear again into that hole of the past from where he had come." Just love that, the force of his personality beating on her.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, this Freddy character is such an interesting kind of one-off character, you
Yeah.
know? I thought he was really compelling.
Yeah, and you kind of feel bad for him a little bit here too when she calls him up and basically says, I'm going, and he
Yeah,
just hangs up without saying a word. He's just
yeah,
like so disappointed.
yeah. Well, and also from his end, it's like, well, this movie is over.
Yep, movie's
We're
dead.
we're done. We're done here. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah, like you said, despite his warning, despite Bill's pleas, Audra books a plane and heads to Bangor because we're told here, Matt, her heart was screaming at her that she had to go. Um, it and is this just a worried wife, Matt, or is this something more?
um I think in this particular case I want to say something more. It could be that she has a bit of the shine and this is just her intuition. It could be that Pennywise gets one helper and so the turtle gets one helper. Um which is not actually right because there's going to be two assholes showing up and only one good
Mm-hmm.
person. But on the other hand, I just want to kind of contradict myself and say, the chapter is titled "Uninvited Guests,"
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of like the idea that they are uninvited, that they're not um, supposed to be there. Um, I don't know. It's really interesting. The text says uninvited guests, so maybe there's something to that. Maybe that's just a,
Yeah.
a, a cute turn of phrase. I don't know.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it's interesting because like you can see clearly, you can draw a line between Henry Bowers being here and that not being good for the losers, right?
yeah,
You
right.
can draw a line between Tom Rogan being here and that not being good for the losers. Audra's a little bit different, right? Like, I'm not going to say specifically that she like won't help, but you don't exactly know how she would be assistance in this particular thing. It seems like just another person that one of our characters cares about, another tool to be used against them, right?
Yeah.
But how? Like in what way? It's really interesting.
Yeah, all the rules are very unclear. So I mean, and it could be beneficial for all we know.
Hmm.
Like it could be that having,
Yeah,
her love and pure love driving her is necessary in some way.
yeah, definitely.
I do
I don't
like
know.
the
We'll see.
sim. I like the symmetry of it being two spouses. So like, okay, so
Yeah,
like set up to the side, we have Henry who is an invited guest. Pennywise invited him, and then we have two uninvited guests, which are Tom, who is being driven by this like obsessive, monstrous love, and then we have Audra, who's being driven by this pure, good love,
yeah. No,
and
I
it's,
like
it's
that.
there's a kind of symmetry to it.
No, yeah, you're right. You're right. That's great. I love that. And so our chapter ends with three characters about to enter the play. Uh, what do you think, Matt? We've kind of circled around this, but what impact are these three characters going to have on our plot?
Um, it could break literally any way, so it's hard to predict. But I have a theory, I guess, that they're all going to sort of cancel each other out,
Mm,
because this is really supposed to be fundamentally a showdown between the Losers Club and Pennywise, and
mm,
um, so all these potential helpers, potential obstacles, potential enemies are going to just kind of sum up to nothing.
sure.
Um, I can't help but note that, there are two bad people and one good person. And you would think that that would break in favor of bad, but then I'm reminded that evil always destroys itself. So maybe the
Sure.
two
Yeah.
bad guys just end up, taking each other out.
No, great point. Great point. Yeah, we'll find out. It's exciting. I love chapters like this because they just leave you like going. King does this a lot where like it's not like things are going super good for our characters, but like, I don't know, there's hope. And then he'll be like, wait a minute, let me just do this thing to the side real quick that makes you go, oh fuck.
Yep, exactly.
um, really, really fun. So from here we move on to Derry, the third interlude, and because this is a new section, we do have another poem. And I wanted to talk about this one because I love this so much. This is a Emily Dickinson poem called "A Bird Came Down the Walk," and the section that King has put in the book is: "A bird came down the walk. He did not know I saw. He bit an angleworm in halves and ate that fellow raw." Um, Fascinating little poem.
It's beautiful. I love it.
Mhm. So this full poem is actually about kind of the the transitory state of nature. Basically the narrator in this poem is observing a bird, and the bird, just mindlessly kills and destroys something and eats it, and then like a second later the bird sees her move and is like timid and afraid of her, and then flies away and is like beautiful as it flaps away. And it's like just observing how nature just can be terrifying and awful but beautiful, but also timid and scared. Like it's
Yeah.
really, really fascinating. Of course, this part that King has chosen is the violent part. And so, I mean, the clearest comparison here with this interlude is people, right? People can be beautiful, people can be wonderful, people can be scared and driven by fear, and people can also be monsters that just walk into town and see someone and bite them in half.
Yep. And maybe all those things at once somehow.
Yep. And so, as this is an interlude, we find ourselves back in Mike's journals, this one having been written on March 17th. I think this is a couple of weeks before he calls the losers back to Derry. This time, he tells us the story of the massacre of the Bradley gang, saying that mass sacrifices are seemingly needed to end these cycles, but also to kick them off, because this is one that kicked off the cycle back in 1929, I think it was.
Very cool idea. And I just have to say once again, man, what a week of reading this is, because we had that awesome chapter we just talked about. And now, we've got these oblique references to the shootout that have been recurring.
Mm-hmm.
But, man, I was not prepared for how fascinating this part of the story was going
Right?
to be. Yeah.
Right? I mean, you would figure like just telling the plot of it, it's just like, well, a bunch of the residents get to come together and they just murder some outlaws. The end. And yet, there's so much fascinating stuff going on here.
Yep.
So, as I said, we learned that the Bradley gang was not performed by the police, state, local, or otherwise, but the residents of Derry themselves. And this is why all the Derry residents seem to conveniently mention the fact that they happened to be out of town that day, even as we learned the chief of police.
God, this is maybe my favorite single instance of King's towns are weird motif ever. I think, like, because it's a story that captures like the clannishness and insularity and capacity for violence of these small communities in such a perfect way. And I also love that it's being told by Mr. Keene in this just like knowing, cynical way, where he's like, not only am I telling you the story, but we all know that we're like this.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just like a kind of chilling sense of self-awareness to it all.
Yeah. I agree. And I love that in this case, it's not as if like our characters go to the police and say, the Bradley gang is here. Were you going to do something about it? And the police say, no, we're not going to do anything about it. And so the residents of Derry are forced to act on their own. This isn't a Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger situation where the people go to the authorities and then are forced to act themselves. They want to do this, right? They in fact specifically avoid going to the authorities. They see it as an opportunity and they want to take it themselves.
Yeah. It's like their own sense of justice and how things ought to be done in this town. And also, like you said, some bloodthirstiness is in there too, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So we learned that Mike is getting this story from Mr. Keene, the druggist supplying Eddie with fake aspirators. I wrote, by the way, folks, for those at home, I wrote Eddie Dean in the script, and Matt was nice enough to highlight the Dean part of it for me.
I didn't want to just like fix it. It's fun because we're always thinking about Eddie Dean in the back of our mind.
We are. Of course we are.
I didn't even mean it to be critical. I was just like, huh.
No, I know.
Yeah.
It's highlighted in green, which is positive. So you were just like, huh.
I literally did it green on purpose for that reason.
So we hear that in 1929, the Bradley gang had come up to Maine to lay low, and they ended up outside of Derry. They decided they wanted to go hunting and came into town to stock up on just a truly absurd amount of ammunition. The owner of the gun store promises to get everything they need in 2 days' time. And then instead of calling the cops, as we said, proceeded to tell everyone in Derry when and where the Bradley gang were going to be, basically setting up a massacre.
Ah, God, I love this reveal. And, maybe I'm just slow and I should have got it before now, but it just did not occur to me that he would do anything other than inform the authorities, and,
Yeah.
and that like I just had it in my head, like, oh yeah, the massacre must be that like the FBI set up a trap and they gunned him down, and it was
Yeah.
violent and bloody, and that was what summoned Pennywise. But it's like, oh no, 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 no. It can't just be the FBI doing it. It's gotta be this visceral, darkness bubbling up from the souls of the townspeople. That's the ritual. Like that's what
Yeah.
brings Pennywise out, right? Um,
Yeah.
it, yeah.
I love kind of Mike's reaction to this too. Like it says, "So, Mr. Keene said, looking at me bright-eyed, what do you think Lal done then? Called the cops?" "I guess he didn't," I said, based on what happened. "Me, I would have broken my leg going to the telephone." "Well, maybe you would and maybe you wouldn't," Mr. Keene said with the same cynical, bright-eyed smile, and I shivered because I knew what he meant, and he knew I knew. Once something heavy begins to roll, it can't be stopped. It's simply going to roll until it finds a flat place long enough to wear away all its forward motion. You can stand in front of that thing and get flattened, but that won't stop it either. Which is a fascinating kind of removal of responsibility, isn't it?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well,
Like,
I mean, you're right, but I guess I see it like that. That's what I meant about Mr. Keene's kind of, his cynical, bright-eyed smile, where he's like, I know exactly what I'm saying about human
yeah.
nature and about the people
Hmm.
of this town.
Yeah.
I'm neither justifying nor condemning it. That this is just the way we are.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it. It's like I'm not interested in changing it because I'm indifferent to it.
yeah,
Like this is
yeah,
it's just the facts,
yeah.
just
And
the
he's like,
facts.
yeah, and he's like, I was there too.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Well, and God,
uh,
this is such a good chapter because like the jovial nature with which these men discuss the future murders they're gonna do, right?
mhm.
Like Keen and Keen is years later. This is what? This is 1985, right? So this is like 50 years
Yeah,
later.
yeah,
Um he's still happy about it.
uh-huh,
Like he's still like,
yeah,
"Oh yeah, and then who showed up but he was wearing a gun too." And he's still like happy and excited about it. Like he's still like this, like he gets pleasure out of not only doing this but retelling the story of doing this.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's not like this is something he's ashamed of. This is not the portion of Derry that they want to hide from and not acknowledge and try to move on past. He loved that they did this actually.
yeah, yeah. These folks needed killing, and we killed them. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I was thinking during this part, like King doesn't do a lot of Western stuff, but
Mhm.
the Dark Tower is distinctly Western inflected, and I was thinking about how Western this feels. The idea
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
a posse being rounded up to take out the banditos, and that's kind of what's happening here. Except it's about as far east as you can possibly go, but it is still this almost this like frontier, us against them, us against the wilderness ethos. And King is saying like, yeah, you don't have to be on the west to get that. That's
Yeah,
just a thing about insular clannish towns.
totally. Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. I think you're right. Especially like he I remember I heard the wind, Sonny, he said dreamily. I remember hearing the wind, hearing the courthouse clock toll two. Bob Tanner came behind me and I was so tight wired I almost blew his head off. I remember the wind. I relive this day that I know all the details of my Western showdown.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
I also kind of like the detail, and maybe I'm just misreading this, but I think it would like when these characters are kind of passing the details of the Bradley gang around to people, like I don't ever hear anyone say, "Hey, you want to like get your gun and kill him with me?" It's just like they just say, "Hey, the
Uh-huh.
Bradley gang's coming into town at 2 o'clock on Sunday," and then like that's enough,
Uh-huh.
where everyone's just like, "Sweet,
Yeah.
let me go
Yeah.
get my gun."
Right. Yeah. At most, it's like making sure everybody's loaded out, right? But even that,
Yeah.
it's just assumed. It's
It's just
almost like
yeah, it's just like an
telepathy.
assume yeah.
Yeah,
There's
I
never
love it.
like, "Let's take a vote. Do we wanna murder these people?"
Yeah, it's
We're
it's
just
more
gonna
like
do
an
it.
yeah, it's like an invitation. It's like
Yeah.
um, it kind of reminds me of the whole Charyu tree thing.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
shouldn't even say kinda. It's like, yeah, that's what this is. This is like
Yeah.
the idea of like the whole town being like, we're not even going to have a conversation. We're just going to do this thing now, and it is basically human sacrifice, like
Yep.
communal human sacrifice that they're doing. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's I didn't make that connection till now, but yeah.
That's great. The day of the massacre arrives, and all the folks of Derry have gathered in the buildings and along the street to go shoot at some gangsters. But Matt, the gangsters are late, and 25 minutes goes by, and nothing. But nobody in Derry moves. It's as if they know it's coming. And as a person who has sat on a Teams call for many, many minutes, I don't wait 25 before I close that Teams call. I'm done.
Uh,
I'm done after 15. I'm done. I'm out. I'm going home.
well,
So
unless you really want to talk to the other person, or as the case may be, shoot them.
shoot them. Yeah. That's true. I guess one of the things that occurred to me, and I think this is like only something I'm connecting specifically because they both happen to occur in this week's reading, but it did remind me a little bit of Bill's insistence that the losers like sit in the gravel pit and wait, because in both these cases, they know something's about to happen. They know Mike's about to show up. And here, the residents of Derry know that even if they're late, the Bradley gang will be here today. It's as if something is keeping them here.
Yeah, you're totally right. I agree that yeah, I it occurred to me the idea that we were juxtaposing these two violent events, sort of
Mm-hmm.
group on group violence, even to the point of involving projectiles, right? Like
Yeah.
obviously very differently couched and
Oh,
contextualized,
certainly. Yeah. Oh,
but
yeah.
like I think it's just as interesting to compare as it is to contrast. Like, yeah, they're posses lying in wait in both
Hmm.
cases for sure.
Yeah. With utmost conviction that something is about to happen.
Yep, yep.
And that does happen because the gangsters arrive and the shootout begins. We don't have to talk about the details of the shootout itself too much, Matt. I enjoyed it as an action set piece for what it is. Like, I think it's just well written and equal parts fun and extremely disturbing as these normal civilians of Derry turn temporarily into murdering psychopaths.
Uh-huh.
Even we see killing the unarmed, surrendering women that are along with the Bradley gang.
Yeah, just trying to run away.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, well, they shouldn't have been there. They
yeah.
deserved it.
And then Keen, when Mike presses him on this, goes, just a couple whores.
Yeah, right. I mean, I genuinely think that's an amazing beat because it's like they don't care,
Yeah,
like they
yeah,
really don't, and it's just this. It's just kind of like cracking open the door to this like well of nihilism at the
yeah,
heart of this jovial candy seller.
yeah. Well, and especially once again, decades later, like the formula for this kind of thing is we got we got excited and kind of bloodlusted and did this horrible thing, and then decades later, I still kind of regret that I let this take me over, and we ended up killing some gangsters, sure, but also some women that really didn't do anything wrong. No, that's not the way Mr. Keene feels at all. He now in 1985 still says, just just a couple whores.
Yeah, just a couple of hours.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
wild.
God, I don't know if I'm reaching, but like it kind of reminds me of like the World War II veteran versus versus Vietnam War veteran, like stereotype, if you will, where
Hmm.
it's like the World War II veteran, brags like, yeah, I threw a grenade into the foxhole and killed 37 Germans and it was awesome. And like the Vietnam veteran like tells the story involving a flamethrower or whatever, and is like clearly
Hmm.
lifelong traumatized by it. And it's just I don't
Sure.
know. There's something about the fact that it's roughly about that age cohort and just, I don't know, it just seems like a vibe that I've always gotten off of people of that age bracket is like a, a lack of remorse. I don't know.
I think I think it's just you're right, but I think it's the politics of that war are much less confusing.
Sure, 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 sure.
The
They grew up in a much harsher world, you know.
Yeah, there
That
were
that
Nazis. There were
there were,
Nazis, you know.
you know, they grew up in the Great Depression, and then they were Nazis. They grew up in a legitimately hard world.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just doing pattern matching over here.
No, I like
Um,
it. I like it.
but
Um,
yeah.
Speaking of war, though, speaking of war,
Uh-huh.
we have this moment. George Bradley run as far as the bench by the war memorial. Then someone pulped the back of his head with a shotgun blast. He fell down dead with his pants full of piss. I pulled this out just specifically because this war memorial and the bench by the war memorial have become like oft referenced features of
Uh-huh.
the stories around Pennywise and the monstrous behavior in this town. And I love that King can kind of just come back to that and just be like, hey, remember the war memorial? Well, here's another fucking awful thing that happened there.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? And also, yeah, so speaking of war, let's talk about this because it's a war memorial, and it's
Uh-huh.
always adjacent to these acts of violence or acts of, you know, terrorism by Pennywise. Um and then I was also thinking about how they keep saying, you know, Henry Bowers's father is basically the way he is because of PTSD from war. And I'm like, do you think maybe that's like a theme, like the idea that the shadow of the trauma of war is sort of laying across the town in a bigger way than is necessarily evident, and that leads people to carry this darkness in them?
Huh. I like that. I never thought about it that way, but I like that. No, I think you're onto something there.
There's not like a ton of evidence for it, but there's a few
Sure.
pieces.
It's fine. Yeah. No, I like it. So one thing I found kind of fascinating that we haven't talked about yet is during this entire story, Mike is being fed red licorice from Keen, right? Like he gives him, you like red licorice, right? And I guess that's not like completely abnormal in and of itself, but the text keeps going back to it. Like Mike kind of, as the story goes on, we briefly cut to Mike eating more and more of it and textually being kind of unaware, barely conscious of the fact that he was doing it. And I find that imagery really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I love it too. I'm not even sure why. I feel like I'm reaching, but I'm like, well, maybe their mouth, you know, his mouth's gonna be red like a clown's.
Yeah.
But I'm
I like that. I like that. I also like I don't I like red licorice. It's like Twizzlers are my movie snack. I like eating them, but
yeah,
also I think red licorice is strongly associated with children.
uh-huh.
I mean candy is generally, but I feel like licorice in particular is like a very childish type of snack.
Sure,
Um
sure.
and so I think it also kind of reinforces like they're feeding into Mike's childishness here a little bit with
Yeah, there's
this.
been a lot of that sort of
Yeah.
imagery this week, so
hmm
that's really interesting.
hmm But in the end, the entire Bradley gang is dead. The car is Swiss cheese. And the only thing that the newspaper says is that there was a gunfight between police and the gang. So it goes in Derry, I guess.
That's great. That's so great. God, I love it.
At the end of the chapter, Mike asks Keen if he saw anything or anyone weird or unexplained. And he responds, oh, you mean the clown? The one that was hanging almost all the way out of the window, just kind of floating there
Uh-huh.
and casting no shadow? Yeah, that was weird.
It's awesome. It's so
He
good.
just knows what he's going to ask immediately.
Yeah.
Huh. I don't know who told you about the clown that we all saw.
Yeah. That was kind of weird.
Yeah.
Just some clown that was weirdly in different places that he couldn't possibly been.
And also, everyone saw carrying a different gun.
I can't explain why, but like I got literal physical chills when they mentioned that, the idea that he's holding whatever gun you're holding.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I was like, so is the idea that like, so he takes on the form of your fear, so it's like, well, this is your fear, like this is what you are,
Yeah. Yeah.
like your fear, he's just reflecting what you're doing back at you.
Yeah.
And that's
100%.
I really thought that was great. Like I in the moment I was like, oh my god, that's amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but it is weird that he's still a clown though.
I
Like
mean, he's barely a clown, right? He's wearing like farm overalls, but just has like white face paint on his face.
true, true, true.
But yes, clown,
But
definite clown.
still a clown, right? And so that kind of suggests that that's something like his natural form, because like why else be a clown?
Yeah.
Like why not just be a dude if he's gonna participate in this in some way, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. I mean, when he scared the shit out of Dean Koontz, the guard at Juniper Hill, he
Uh-huh.
wasn't just a dog. He was a dog head on a clown body.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
And yeah, and everything we see of him is reinforced. Like the orange hair and orange pom poms on the clown suit is always like the way King makes it clear to us, the reader. Yes, this is it. That this thing you're seeing right now, yes, it is it.
Yeah.
That's his kind of cheat code for it. And I mean, the true answer here could just be, for the sake of storytelling, like we need to have some sort of base image to work off of, and uh clowns are creepy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the in story reason I think is potentially interesting.
Yeah. No, you're right about that. We'll keep paying attention to it. I guess I'm just asking because I'm like, I suspect there is a reason, you know,
Sure. Well,
something to do
maybe.
with the history of the town or something. It's
Yeah.
like that, like why a clown? Something
Yeah.
happened, some reason.
Sure. Yeah, maybe. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay.
So from here we move on. We're here, Matt, part 4, July of 1958. We're going back into the past once again. And of course, here we have a couple of more quotes. Another quote from William Carlos Williams Patterson. I just wanted to read this here. The problem with discussing these quotes at the beginning of the parts is we haven't read the entire part yet. And so normally this quote is like clever in how it relates to what's going to happen, but we don't know what's going to happen yet. The Patterson quote is, "You lethargic, waiting on me, waiting for the fire, and I attendant upon you, shaken by your beauty, shaken by your beauty, shaken."
I love it.
Anything?
I like poems.
Yeah.
Um, Not really. I mean, we got the word fire. We got the idea of being overwhelmed by someone's beauty. These are both things I associate with Ben and his sort of from a distance adoration of
Yeah.
Bev. Um,
Seems to indicate we're gonna like turn up the romance aspect of this
yeah,
in July, maybe.
yeah, or the at least the tension there. Yeah,
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And then we have a quote from the song "My Toot Toot" by Sidney Simeon. Um, Man, I don't know what to do with this. It's so like this is
Uh-huh.
exactly what we talked about before, where King will put like one just incredibly beautiful, powerful quote from a very well regarded poem, and then also it's a fun song.
Uh-huh. Yeah. No, I he loves to do this. I love it when he does it. It's
Uh-huh.
to me, it's the same guy who makes these campy short stories that we enjoy, where
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know it's like he can't keep his sense of humor out of stuff. He just can't.
yeah. I strongly suggest everyone go listen to My Toot Toot, because it's really funny.
All right, I'll do that.
It's, I mean, like, I don't know. It's a very silly song. It's a very silly song.
Awesome.
You're my sweet little toot toot. Anyway, let's move on to the first chapter of part 4, chapter 13, the apocalyptic rock fight. And we're back, Matt. We're back with the italicized chapter intros as we moved back into the 50s. Before we begin, though, I want to talk to you briefly about how King has kind of laid the groundwork for this rock fight. Basically, since we moved into part 3, back to 1985, this thing has been mentioned again and again and again as this really, really, really important turning point for the losers in this summer. And I just kind of like that. Like we've been prepared for this, and then you turn the page and you see the chapter title is the apocalyptic rock fight, and you're like, hell yeah.
Uh-huh. Absolutely. Yeah. Um so yeah, I mean, first of all, I do think we're contrasting this against the shooting of the outlaws.
Yeah,
we just saw.
100%. Yep, yep.
Um, and I love that it's always the apocalyptic rock fight. It's not just like that one time we got in a fight with Henry Bauer's gang and there were rocks. It's the apocalyptic rock fight. It's
Yeah.
and like you said, the chapter title being you're like, oh, finally, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I mean that's the perfect thing that you would believe a group of kids having defeated their enemies would label it that. That's what we're going to call this.
Yeah, I think the thing that makes it apocalyptic is the explosives for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a Bill chapter in that we start with him in 1985 and then move back into the 50s with him. But Matt, it's almost as if like Bill is paying it back to Mike here a bit. He stole Mike's section of the last chapter, and here he's given Mike his chapter because so much of chapter 13 is really a chapter about Mike Hanlon, right?
Yeah, and I love it. It does feel like a balancing of the scales. You're right.
Yeah. Bill makes it to the library first, still waiting for the others as Mike prepares to close everything up for the day. I love where Bill observes a kid checking out his latest novel and preparing to take his girl home with him. And I love how Bill is kind of touched by this couple. This couple affects him deeply, right?
Yeah, um, I love this moment as well. I thought it was very cool. I thought it was touching. I thought it was poignant. Um, what jumped to my mind actually was the memory of a similar moment from Salem's Lot when Ben Mears encounters this protagonist of that novel. Ben Mears encounters somebody who's read his book, um, and I feel like Bill's reaction is the reaction of a middle aged man. Whereas the reaction of Ben Mears was the reaction of a much younger man who was more easily flattered, more kind of full of himself, maybe reflecting the way Stephen King felt about himself at the time. Maybe not. I actually think Ben Mears is not just Stephen King. I don't know.
Sure.
Do you feel me at all? And there being any kind of connection between these two moments, other than the sort of I don't know. I was reminded of it though. I'll say that
Yeah, I
much.
like that. I like that. I do think it shows an older, like I think King, eventually you just get used to this stuff, right? You have to. Like
Yeah.
King's life has been King's lived so much more of his life as one of the most famous authors ever than he has some random guy that nobody knows or recognizes, right? And
Right.
so eventually you're just going to get used to it. You're just going to get used to the fact that so many people read your stuff when you're just walking around, you're going to see someone with their book in your book in their hand.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's interesting that Bill kind of sees this and like instead of chalking it up to, oh, well, that's what people do, he chalks it up to like the kind of um Ka type kismet of this whole experience. Is like, of course, while I'm sitting here waiting, I'm just gonna happen to see someone carrying my book out. Of course that's gonna happen. Um but but yeah, I do think there's something to the idea that this is the transition that all successful authors go to, where you just get used to this kind of attention or uh like notoriety, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I guess what I was kind of fumbling toward trying to say was, like you just said, that this character is much more like a middle-aged Stephen King looking back on his career and seeing
Yeah.
somebody reading his book and not feeling any urge to go over and be like, "Hey,
Yeah.
look look at the back of the dust jacket.
Yeah.
Look
You
at
see
the
me?
author." Yeah, right. Yeah,
I don't even. The kid doesn't even realize that Bill's sitting there, right? I
no,
don't think
no,
so.
he doesn't, and neither does Bill think like, "Oh, I should say something." It's
Yeah.
just, yeah, I
Yeah.
kind of liked it.
No, that's great. I like it. So Bill thinks back to the day of the rock fight, the day the six of them had gotten together, exchanged all their stories about Pennywise, and then looked to Bill on what they should do next. I love this quote here. Why me? He wanted to shout at them, but of course he knew that too. It was because, like it or not, he had been tapped for the position, because he was the idea man, because he had lost a brother to whatever it was, but most of all, because he had become, in some obscure way that he would never completely understand, Big Bill. Love
I
it.
love it. Yeah. Do you think that Bill's being tapped is meant to be seen as a kind of supernatural thing, or is he just tapped in the sense that he is the kind of like the book said earlier, he's the idea man, and thus he's naturally, He's just a natural leader. It's not magical. Do you think?
Yes,
Yes.
to
Okay.
both.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
I do think it's both. I mean, I think, we talked about this earlier, that Bill seems to have this almost supernatural level of charisma and a kind of ability to hold the attention of these people in particular.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I think it's both. Yeah.
Makes sense.
We haven't talked about like the kind of delicious irony of the fact that, the leader of a group is so often the one to make like the inspiring speeches, and that's the one thing that Bill struggles with his stutter, right?
Yeah. No,
Interesting.
you're right that we haven't talked about it. I guess the way I always have seen this in this book so far is like the things that make him a good leader are simply not gab. Like it's decision making.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
being there. It's this quiet determination and focus
Hmm.
and calm in bad situations. It's all these qualities that have nothing to do with being persuasive
Yeah.
or yeah, I mean, he's only persuasive in the sense that he makes good decisions, and thus they're like, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. He
Um,
can't. He kind of, by the nature of his stutter, can't like mess around with explaining it or trying to persuade. He's a doer.
yeah,
He
yeah.
just.
I actually really like that as a statement about the nature of what good leadership is, where it's like
Hmm.
a really good leader shouldn't need to have to craft speeches because their
Hmm.
choices should stand on their own.
Hmm. I like that. So they talk about how they can't go to the cops because the cops will never believe them. And to illustrate this point, King gives us this little anecdote about poor Richie Tozier, who is wearing different glasses than we've seen him in before. And that is because his glasses were recently shattered by that person we felt a lot of sympathy for a few minutes ago, Henry Bowers.
Uh huh.
um, when he went to tell his mother about the incident, she didn't believe him and blamed Richie's carelessness for the loss of the glasses, or at least chalked it up to, oh, well, it's just you kids messing around, blah, blah, blah. You should be more careful. Um, and it's such a sad little story, right? Like, it's like just this little anecdote
Yeah.
about, oh, by the way, this is their lives. Like, this is it. Like, he goes to his parents. He says, like, a bully was beating me up. That's why my glasses are broken, is because some random kid is beating me up. And she's like, oh, you need to be more careful.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a really depressing little story. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was tragic from all sides to me. Like I didn't feel much sympathy for the mom, but like what was sad to me was like I can imagine being in the position of a parent and just like not having the money for this right now,
Yeah.
and your
Yeah.
kid broke their glasses, and it's like you just don't have the spoons right now to deal with the idea that your kid's being beat up and the glasses are broken.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
of course, from your kid's point of view, you're just being totally, callous. I mean, fundamentally she is being totally callous, but I found it to be just overall a very depressing vignette. I thought it was great.
Yeah, and it perfectly illustrates this central disconnect between the lives of children and the lives of adults, and in this stuff that, like, if you can't believe me about something as mundane as a bully pushed me down and broke my glasses, like, I am completely separated from you in everything here, because there's no way you're going to buy into any of the stuff we're saying about it.
Yeah, yeah, that's totally true. Yeah, it's just an excellent demonstration of the lack of trust. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So if they can't go to the cops, what can they do? Maybe they can go to other kids, but who?
I
It's
don't
Mike.
know.
It's Mike. It's Mike.
Oh, Mike. Yeah, I get it. Yeah,
So from here we cut over to Henry Bowers. I love actually, this transition is perfect. The writing here is so good, where he kind of moves through each of the losers and says, if you had asked Ben, he would have said that Henry Bowers hated him the worst. If you asked Eddie, he would say hated him the worst. But they're all wrong. The one that Henry hates the worst is Mike Hanlon, and that is because of racism.
yep, yep,
I actually, like, I think this is a really interesting kind of, just, once again, King trying to understand the nature of evil and badness, and where does this stuff come from. We just spend this really interesting time like ruminating on where racism comes from. And in Henry Bauer's case, the racism comes from his father, who absolutely poisoned him against black people generally, but of course Mike Hamlin specifically. I do love this as like an examination of like how racism and mental health issues and all these things pass down, how we inherit these ideas. Henry just starts becoming like his dad because his dad has set things up for that to happen.
Yeah, exactly. This book has obviously included these racial themes up to this point, but this
Yeah.
section just is almost exclusively an analysis and study of that process, from all sides, really.
Yeah. And it's really fascinating because like Mike hasn't done anything to Henry, right? Like, and I mean, Mike's dad has not really even done anything to Henry's father either. But this is even more one removed from that because there has been no wrong done here. And I'm not trying to say that like racism is okay if the race you're being racist against has wronged you in some way. No, that's not what I'm trying to say. But it is really interesting that there's nothing here and there's no reason for it at all, other than just passing down stuff. Like I'm thinking about, Matt, and you might have predicted I'm going here. The first case of like overt racism I experienced in my life was when you and I were in college and someone on our floor
uh,
was just like overtly
yeah,
racist.
like
Like,
that was their whole personality, actually.
yeah, actually, yes. And like, and like you're sitting here like looking at this person and being like, why? Like, like why? Like,
Uh-huh.
there's no reason for it. And there's never a reason for it, right? But just like it's just fascinating, and it's probably for the same reason that Henry is, that he just had a racist piece of shit father who taught him that this was acceptable behavior.
Yeah.
And I don't know, fascinating stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it was, and I agree. That was so bizarre, and it was much like this in the story, where it's like it's like he didn't feel like it was right that he should be made to feel bad because of how he was raised, and so he was going to
Yeah,
double down on it.
yeah,
And that's like exactly the dynamic we see happening here, where
hmm,
it's like, oh, the Hanlon family didn't, just fold when we started being violent and cruel toward them.
yeah,
That justifies further escalation of the hatred,
yeah.
and it's like that's total madness.
Yeah, it's
But
insane. It's totally insane. Yeah.
no, yeah, God, I honestly I blocked out that whole human being, Scott. So I wasn't quite sure where you were going. I was like, oh God, no.
I will never forget it. I will never forget it. It's like, I mean, I think, I lived in a pretty sheltered existence up until that point. So like,
Uh,
I'm not saying that I didn't believe racism was real until I got to college. I certainly did. I just never experienced it. I'd never experienced the kind of overt, like public, shameless racism that I
yeah,
did
like
in that
yeah.
dorm hall. It was shocking to me.
Yes, yes. Public protestations of racism.
It's wild, wild.
An avowed racist, you could say.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Jesus.
Oh man. Anyway, sorry about that. Um, so we do an interesting thing with Henry Bowers, and I continue to love how we make ourselves feel bad about him, and then flip it here because in a perfect reverse save the cat, I like to call it, we have a kill the dog moment, which is where
Uh-huh.
we see Henry Bowers was indeed the person that killed Mike's family dog, Mr. Chips. Um, he poisoned him and then slowly watched him die. It is monstrously cruel and awful. And you might have started to notice, Matt, that King like really loves dog violence
Uh-huh.
as an instrument of demonstrating someone's like complete brokenness and monstrousness.
Sure. I think I can think of a few examples, certainly.
Yeah.
I did find that, like, even while he's doing all this crazy, horrible, violent, depraved stuff, I still was like aware that he was a kid. And I think it's because we had the contrasting moment of him, just seeing him as the totally beaten down and mentally destroyed adult just a
Yeah.
few,
Yeah.
not that many pages ago. And I'm not like it's such a weird spot to be in, because like no part of me really wants to like apologize for Henry or be like, no, it's like he killed the dog because like it's not his fault. It's like, no, this sucks. This is a shitty child. But like the text, I think, is ensuring that you understand what's going on here. That this is a kid who's totally been influenced by his dad's horrible ideas and behavior. You know,
Hmm.
as soon as he kills the dog, he goes and he tells his dad, and he gets praised to the heavens for it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's very clear, like, hey, he wouldn't do this stuff if not for his dad. Just,
Hmm.
let's
Hmm.
be clear about that.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think you're right. Anyway, Henry just absolutely terrorizes Mike. That has become his mission in life. I do also, speaking of kind of how we're talking and kind of confronting racism head on here, I really like this part where Mike's mom like wants to do something about this, like that this Henry kid has continually terrorized her son, and they need to talk to someone or do something about it. And Mike's father maybe is a little bit more pessimistic, or maybe just knows the score a little bit better, maybe knows Derry a little bit better. Um, that they there's nothing they can do. Like it does remind me of a bit about like you've heard. I'm sure you've heard the stories that like all black parents have to have at some point in their kids' lives, especially their male children, a conversation about the police. Like they have to have that conversation and how to act around a police and that kind of thing, because that's a very real thing that a lot of black people go through. Um, and that's this reminds me of that conversation a little bit here from Mike's dad, where it's just like, look, we're not going to stop people from being racist. Like the best we can do is try to maneuver around it. um
Yeah.
and that it's a very sad conversation that King is really just tackling head on here.
Yeah, it's really painful to watch Mike's
Hmm.
mom's understandable rage against, clashing against the dad's kind of circumspect sense of fatalism about the whole thing, and
Yeah, yeah.
basically just being like, yeah, he could fight back, and then what? Then what happens the next day?
Hmm.
We know
Hmm.
how this plays out, and
Yeah.
it's interesting because his dad has this kind of simultaneous, resignation and like acceptance of it, where he's just like, yeah, this is how the world is, and it doesn't seem to make him upset that it's this way. He's just
Yeah.
like, yeah, so it goes,
Hmm.
It's
Hmm. Yeah, he's a man that's lived his life. He knows the score
yeah,
of a lot of the stuff, and it's a depressing score. Like I think that the thing he says specifically is like, we're not going to get people to stop saying the N word in dairy. Like that's not going to happen, right? And that is fatalistic. I think you're right, but I think he sees truth in it.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so but as much as he is fatalistic, as much as he says, just try to stay out of their way and keep going and run, he says eventually you have to do something, right? And I love here. And what it all comes down to is that you have to be careful where you take your stand. You have to ask yourself if Henry Bowers is worth the trouble. Is he? No, Mike said. No, I don't think so. It would be yet a while before he changed his mind. July 3rd, 1958, in fact.
oh my god, so exciting.
Yeah.
I think be careful where you take your stand is such an interesting line in a Stephen
Hmm.
King novel, particularly because you got to take your stand,
Hmm.
sometime, but make sure you pick the right spot, make sure you
Yeah.
pick the right time.
Yeah, and make sure it's worth the trouble, because you will get in trouble. Not saying that it will never be worth the trouble. That's the thing I love about Mike's father, is that like you're absolutely right. He has this kind of fatalistic, uh, pessimistic view of race, of like race relations, I guess,
Yeah,
in uh Maine in 1958. Probably just accurate ones, but
right.
it's not as if he's completely given up on the idea of, we have to push back against this eventually. It's just that he knows you have to pick your battles, and you have
Yeah,
to, as you said, be careful where you take your stand. It's not be careful if you take your stand, but where you take your stand.
yeah, yeah. Pick your battles is the perfect phrase for it, and
Yep.
I mean, it seems incredibly fitting that that's literally what we see happen at the end of the chapter. We see them
Hmm.
finally, after many chapters of them kind of being hounded and harassed as a group and so forth, they take their stand.
Yeah. And it is the catalyst that brings them together finally as a complete unit.
Yep.
So as we lead up to the confrontation between Henry and Mike, we must first get to the rest of the losers and get them in their position for the fight. So we cut back to them as they discuss the monster clown terrorizing Derry. The losers have reasoned the same thing you have, Matt, that it lives in the sewers under Derry, and Bill has started to do a little bit of research by asking his dad about the sewers. And every single conversation that we have between Zach and Bill Denbrough breaks my freaking heart, Matt, because it always seems to emphasize and bring words to the death of Georgie hanging over everything. I love this. I'm not going to do the stutter, by the way, but Ben Hanscom calls them Morlock holes, Bill said, grinning. Zach grinned back, but it was a shadow of his old grin. Just gotta have that in there, right? Like
Yeah.
every moment is punctuated by the grief that they're all experiencing.
Yeah. No, that always breaks my heart every single time.
Mm-hmm. So Bill's father warns him to stay out of those sewers. And when Bill tries to press him to see if anyone's ever gone down there and mapped the tunnels that Zach says are just like no, like they've just been built so long ago and that no one actually knows where to go down there. Zach really like quickly and suspiciously changes the subject on him, right?
Yeah. It's really interesting to consider like what Zach is thinking here. Like
Yeah.
maybe it could just be as simple as the conversation is nudging toward, too close toward conceptual proximity to what's happened to Georgie, and it's kind of making him sad. But could he actually be suspicious of like, is Bill going to try to go into the sewers? And I don't know. I wasn't sure
Yeah,
exactly what his
that he
what his
he
thinking
might
was.
he might know something. And yeah, like I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. He might know. He's avoiding something, right? It
Yeah.
struck me as being slightly mysterious, slightly more
Yep.
mysterious than just like he didn't want Bill to go to the sewer because no parent wants their child to go to the sewer. It seemed a bit more mysterious than that. I agree.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Yep. Something I literally just noticed as we were sitting here talking about it. It is interesting to me that in this section, Bill's father is consistently Zach, not Bill's father. You know, like
yeah,
Ben Hanscom calls them Morlock holes. Bill said grinning. Zach grinned back. Right. It's not Bill's father, Bill's dad grinned back. It's Zach grinned back.
yeah. I don't know what to make of that because I can't. Yeah, I can't think of any other kid who thinks of their parent that way in the story, and
I
even
think it
Bill
just,
hasn't.
yeah, it just
So
demonstrates the disconnect and the distance between them. I think that there's no warmth there, really.
yeah. He's not filling his proper role as dad.
Yeah,
He's just being Zach here. I like that.
yeah.
That's good. It's a good explanation.
Speaking of no warmth, we have this line here, what I really loved. Go on, Bill, Zach said, and Bill could feel the coldness again. That coldness made suppers a kind of torture as his father leafed through electrical journals. He hoped for a promotion the following year, and his mother read one of her endless British mysteries, Marsh, Sayers, Innes, Allingham. Eating in that coldness robbed food of its taste, and it was eating frozen dinners that he had never seen the inside of an oven. Sometimes, after, he would go up to his room and lie in his bed, holding his gripping stomach, and think. He thrust his fists against the post and still insists he sees the ghosts. He thought of that more and more since Georgie had died, although his mother had taught him the phrase 2 years before. It had taken on a talismanic cast in his mind. The day he could walk up to his mother and simply speak that phrase without tripping or stuttering, looking her right in the eye as he spoke it, the coldness would break apart. Her eyes would light up, and she would hug him and say, "Wonderful, Billy. What a good boy. What a good boy." Ugh.
Yeah.
So
Ah,
there's this. I pulled this because there's the quote that we saw back in '85. Here it is now in the story in '58 as well,
yeah.
and it's awful.
Yeah. It's just so heartbreaking, dude. I really want all these kids to be okay, Scott. Tell me they're all going to be okay.
They're all gonna be okay.
Tell me they're all going to grow up to be happy, successful people. Oh,
um, this is interesting because like I wonder. I wonder what reading this particular passage does to you at different ages, because I wonder if the child me that read this believed at all that his dream here would come true, right? That if he said this phrase correctly, that his mother really would, like, in a way, come back to him a little bit here, because the adult in me is just like, oh, Bill, you don't
Yeah.
understand. Like,
Right.
that's not going to happen. But I
Yeah.
do wonder if you read this book when you're closer to Bill's age, if that dream, like, if you're like, yeah, maybe he could. I don't know.
No, I think kids, I mean, I can't speak for child Scott, but I do think that kids tend to think that there is a perfect sequence of words they can say to their parent that will fix whatever the problem is. And it's just that they just can't, it's very hard for them to accept or see that it's just like, no, whatever your parents' problems are, they're things that you have no power over. And it's very frustrating for any person to
Hmm.
be in that position. So it's understandable.
Yeah, yeah. I do really like this detail, though, that Bill, almost without even thinking about it, while relaying this story to his friends, cuts out all the bad parts that make him sad and crafts an entirely new setting for it. Like that we were just sitting on the couch watching TV and drinking coffee.
Uh-huh.
And then everyone's like, wow, your dad lets you drink coffee? He's like, yeah, we drink coffee all the time. Look at
Yeah.
all the warmth. There's so much warmth here because it's hot coffee.
Yeah.
Sad.
Yeah, it is really sad. And of course it speaks to this idea that Bill has this flexible relationship with the truth,
Yeah, yeah.
which is a childish, quality and may also, I think that ties into um it obviously straightforwardly ties into the idea that he becomes a novelist because he has this creative mind.
Yeah.
But I also like the idea that extending that creativity to just like, yeah, I'm just going to change what really happened in this story because this makes a better story. It's like it's the imagination leaks into reality, which I think is thematically relevant for this story in particular.
Yeah. Do you ever know people like this that just like would tell anytime they tell a story, you could almost kind of tell they were uh, crafting something that sounds better? I mean, I think everyone does this on some
Yeah.
level, right? Every
Yep.
time we just watched Rashomon last week.
I was gonna say, of course I know him. He's me. But no, I don't lie. I just if I'm telling a story, I try to make it a good story.
Hmm, hmm.
But so,
Yeah.
but
I mean, I knew like there's a gambit, right? Gamut. I knew people that just lied constantly. Like I had this guy in, I think it was seventh grade, I think, that would just tell stories all the time.
yeah.
And like I was just so gullible enough to believe him, like that he was like I think he was like a millionaire and he bought a house or
Uh-huh.
something.
Uh-huh.
And like I think this was like one of the first times in my young childhood that I encountered purposeless lying that was just like I'm just doing it because I feel like it. And I have this very distinct memory of going back to my family and telling them about this kid and my mom being like, he's just lying. That's not
Right.
true. And just being like, what?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's really
What?
a non sequitur, but
Why would he? Right? No,
yeah.
I think I knew this kid too, Scott. And by that I mean, yeah, I think we all knew this kid.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, no, what's really creepy is when you meet an adult who's like this,
Yeah, yeah, gosh,
and you're just
imagine
like,
not growing out of that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I think Bill's is a much more innocent, like I'm just going to reframe or reset or kind of decorate my stories up a little bit, which, as you said, fits perfectly into the writer in him.
yep,
So Bill also says he thinks it is what he's learned is called a glamour, and he spent some time at the library researching it, finding a few ways that other cultures have dealt with them, including our old friend Chud. And I'm just going to say Chud here, Matt. I really do think in the movies they pronounce it Chud, but that sounds weird. So it's just Chud. It's just going to be Chud. It's a
I like
ritual of Chud.
I like Chud.
Hmm. So in this ritual of Chud, which we have been primed by the book to know is important some way because Ben thought about it back in 1958, it involves you and the glamour biting each other's tongue and then telling each other jokes and riddles until one person wins, and then that's the ritual.
Yep. What the fuck, Scott? This was in a whole different book that we covered this exact thing. Even calling it a Manitou. In fact, we've had 2 books about Manitous.
Do you think Pennywise is actually a supercomputer train?
That's not even what I was talking about, but yes. I was
Wait,
talking
it
about
wasn't?
the terror, or what was the other one I just thought of? Shit, now I lost it.
The Terror being the Dan Simmons book you're talking about, right?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. And then the other one with the Manitou being Ghost Story by Peter Straub.
I guess those are much more direct references. I was just talking about Blaine the Mono.
You're talking about the Riddles in the Dark
Yeah.
chapter
It's not exactly the same thing, but sure.
of The Hobbit, which is what you're referencing. No, I was explicitly referencing the idea of a Manitou and a glamour and so forth, which has been in anyway. Those
Yeah.
were probably all inspired by it. It doesn't matter. I was like I was like standing up out of my chair, like what this the tongue thing that was explicitly in the other book. Yeah. Anyway,
I totally forgot the tongue thing was it. You think I would remember that, but I totally forgot that was in The Terror.
yep.
So with that, the kids get bored because they're kids, you know? They're talking about this monster that's been hunting them and what they need to do about it. And then okay, we're finished with that conversation. We're bored. Let's do
Yeah.
something.
Let's go
And
play.
yeah.
Yeah.
So they decide to head off to the dump and shoot off some fireworks. And as they leave, we get this. And none of them saw the orange eyes staring at them from a tangle of brambles and sterile blackberry bushes to their left. The brambly patch scrubbed the entire bank for 30 feet, and in the center of it was one of Ben's Morlock holes. It was from this raised concrete pipe that the eyes, each more than 2 feet across, stared.
I love it. Yeah, God, so good. It's like particularly freaky that the eyes are just gigantic. Because it's not like Pennywise is doing this for anybody. This isn't.
Yeah.
There's no audience for this. There's no specific kid who's seeing this. This is just how he is when nobody's watching, and that makes it even more creepy.
Yeah, and he's just spying on these kids, right? That's so it's an interesting we haven't seen Pennywise like this yet, you know? Every
Yeah.
time we've seen him has been appearing in front of someone to scare them or motivate them in Bauer's case, but this is just him in the background observing.
Yeah, and they're orange eyes, which is interesting
Mhm.
because it's like the orange pom poms. You know, the pom poms are on his chest. His eyes are,
Yeah.
you know, typically on the face is where they go. So it almost makes me wonder, like, are the eyes, are the pom poms really his eyes? You know,
I
'cause
like to think that some point in the editing process, King got a note that said, "Steve, we don't always are clear when you're referencing something that it ties back to it."
uh
And he goes, "Fine." And so in every instance where he references a monster related
yeah,
to Pennywise, he puts orange in there. He's like, "There you go,
it's
orange."
entirely. I I know you're sort of joking, but it's entirely possible that he was that like the first readers might have been like, so there's like a bunch of different monsters in the town, and he's like, no, God, obviously they're all the same creature, and they're like, I didn't get that, and so yeah, he probably had to make it really explicit.
Orange fucking everywhere.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So as for Mike, he was walking to his church school to practice for his July 4th music performance when Bowers and his gang notices him. Matt, last week you talked about good old Belch Huggins and
uh-huh.
how we might be seeing a turnaround with his character. Well, no,
Yeah, that was a little optimistic.
but it certainly does seem like it might be happening with another of his gang, Victor Chris, because as Henry and his gang slowly and secretly sneak up on Mike, it's Chris that seems to understand how dangerous Henry is, and it's Chris that seems the most concerned about what Henry could possibly do, that Henry could, and this is all in caps in the book, go too far.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting here how we see the toadies that they suck.
Mm-hmm.
They suck in the sense that they're cool to go along with hurting people as long as there's no risk of getting in real trouble.
Yeah,
But you can kind of imagine that these guys would grow out of it eventually.
yeah, yeah.
They're not in the same position as your Henry Bowers is. Um, not that any of that absolves their being pieces of shit, but
Yeah, well, and they still like despite all that, I think the most fascinating bit we see with Victor is despite all that, he still does it, right? Like
Yeah.
in the actual apocalyptic rap fight, I think it says he doesn't want to be here. He doesn't want to do this. He's worried that Henry's going too far, but I'm in it. So I
Yeah.
guess I'll throw rocks at children.
Yeah. But that, no, I actually thought it was cool how Victor um and Belch respond very differently. Like they have,
Yeah.
like Victor seems like he's gonna, if he would have grown up, he would have been kind of a cool headed guy, because he's like, crap, I didn't want to get in the situation, but now that I'm in the situation, I guess I'm gonna be very tactical and cold about it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Belch is more like, fearful and kind of, I don't know, typical in his behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. So right when the gang is about to charge him, Mike notices, thanks to it's a fart. I think someone farted, or maybe they just burped.
The fart, yeah, it was a fart.
Perfect. He hears the fart, notices them, and takes off running. And the chase is on. Here we go.
What a scene!
Oh, it's only going to get better, man. It's only
Yeah, I
going
know.
to go up from here.
I know. The idea, just them like quietly chasing him and then him noticing them and running, already a great scene, and then it just escalates.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the losers head to the dump to shoot off their fireworks. And Matt, I love this part so much. The kids are walking through the barrens and they start just playing pretend with each other. They're pretending they're going on safari, complete with them seeing a man-eating tiger up ahead. And this isn't it, right? It isn't a monster. It's just a tiger that they're making up. It's just good old child imagination. And I love it. I love that it's here. I love that the book allows us to see these kids as kids still. Like, they are going through so much. They are on this precipice, this threshold into being a young adult and then adult. And yet right now they're still kids. And so let's just show them just do some kid shit. And they're just playing pretend in the barrens, pretending like there's a tiger up ahead.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful scene. I love how the text basically says that they all see it as if it's really there, but does that, but it does that in a way where you're not confused, where you're not like, oh, is Pennywise taking the form of a tiger? You're just like, no, they do it's the shared imagination thing that all children do, where they all exist in a hallucinated world that is somehow shared. It's almost telepathy. Then we all grow up and forget that we can do that. It's such a weird thing.
Yeah. Well, you know how King makes that clear, Matt? No
How?
orange pom poms. No orange pom poms. There you go.
But he's orange. But he's a tiger.
Yeah, but it doesn't accentuate the orange.
Oh, I see. You're right.
So it's not Pennywise. It's just an imagined tiger.
Yes. Yes.
But of course it is dairy, Matt. And so on top of imagining a man-eating tiger, the kids pretend that the river that they are crossing is filled with piranha. And Pennywise is actually super happy to oblige in that particular fear as Eddie looks down into the water and sees real piranha swimming around the Kentucky River. The piranha have orange on them, Matt. Just in case you were confused, they have orange on them.
Goldfish with sharp teeth, yeah. But they're in the water. Note that they're in the water. The water. Oh yeah, another thing I noticed that I wanted to say. I noticed this like the first week we did this show on this episode, on this book. And I never mentioned it because I just forgot over and over and over and over. But the water, Scott, it's always described as chuckling. It's always chuckling over the rocks. It's always chuckling down the embankment. Don't think I haven't noticed that the water is chuckling. And what else chuckles, Scott? I'm gonna make you say it. God damn it! What else chuckles?
Is it a clown?
It's a clown. See, I've been right this whole time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but the very first line that Pennywise says to Georgie as he kills him, they float, the thing in the drain crooned in a clotted, chuckling voice.
It's great.
Sometimes I like when you notice things.
Yeah, and I did notice it. I'm glad everyone to know that. Okay, good.
Everyone knows now. Everyone
Okay.
knows.
All right.
You notice that the river chuckles, which is
Yes.
great because it's not like it's an inaccurate description of water, but it is
Yeah.
one that you wouldn't commonly use, right? And so it means that it's intentional.
Yeah. Especially because he uses it often. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. All right. The kids reach the dump, but find the dump keeper is out and about today, and getting caught there could get them in trouble. So Bill decides that they should head to the gravel pit. Before we move on here, I just wanted to talk about like dumps, Matt. Do you have like a town dump you went to?
Not that I know of. We certainly never went to it if there was one.
I feel like this is something you see in like, I don't know why like 50s nostalgia got connected with dumps, because I feel like there's a lot of like 50s and 60s kids stories that also always have like a dump in it that you're around. I think this is partially just because of the way waste management is dealt with in
Yeah.
towns has changed pretty dramatically since this time.
Yeah.
For example, we don't typically burn trash anymore because oops,
Yeah.
that's bad.
And also, I feel like maybe you used to be able to get a lot more value out of salvaging junk that
Sure.
you
Sure.
either can't get now or you get it via like industrial scale recycling of some kind.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, true. True. So back with Mike as he frantically runs away from Henry and his friends. One moment worth discussing here, I think, is when Mike realizes that Henry's friends are now scared of him. I love this. They're scared of him now, Mike thought suddenly, and a new voice spoke inside of him, perhaps for the first time, a voice that was disturbingly adult. They're scared, but that won't stop them. You got to get away, Mikey, or something's going to happen. Not all of them will want it to happen, maybe. Not Victor, and maybe not Peter Gordon. But it will happen anyway, because Henry will make it happen. So get away. Get away fast. Whew.
it's great. I love it when they have a disturbingly adult voice speak up in their mind.
Disturbingly adult. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is this the turtle? Like what is this voice? It
Hmm.
doesn't matter, but I'm just curious what you think.
I don't think so. I think when this kind of thing happens, I think it's just like, hey, they're 11. You know,
Yeah.
it happened with Ben before. It's kind of maybe happened with Bill. I don't quite remember. And
Yeah.
it's just the idea of like, yeah, you're going from being a kid into going to being an adult. You're at the beginning of that slope, and every once in a while you have a thought that's kind of like, huh, that's a bit more sophisticated than I usually am able to, you know, frame
Yeah.
things, or a bit more cynical perhaps. So
I
um
completely agree. I love that.
yeah. But yeah, I love this paragraph too, because you really feel the sense of escalation here. This idea
Mm-hmm.
that like, again, to reference their age, like if this had happened a year ago, you know, maybe Mike would have taken some bruises, got some more mud on him. But now all the kids are older. They're more toward adulthood. They have more of that adult capacity for violence and, you know, rage,
Mm-hmm.
and so it could definitely go very badly.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. And it is perhaps ironic that the moment of Henry's most dangerous tendencies is also the moment that it turns out to be right
Yeah,
for Mike to make his stand.
true.
And the reason for that stand, Matt, is that Henry decides to let Mike know that it was him that killed his dog. And this is the moment King alluded to earlier, the moment where Mike makes that decision that Bowers is indeed worth the trouble. And instead of running away into the barrens, he turns towards the gravel pit and his destiny.
Ah, such a great moment, because you can see, you know, in the meantime, we're kind of watching the other kids collect the rocks, and we're like,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I can
Mm-hmm.
see exactly where this is going very clearly, and I'm
Yeah.
so excited.
Yeah, so Mike collects his old coal ammunition and he gets some pretty good shots on Henry before eventually retreating to the gravel pit itself. And it's there he finds the losers. And as you said, Matt, they're standing there waiting for him. Why? Because Bill realized beforehand something was going to happen and he starts loading his pockets with rocks and everyone just follows suit. And again, to your point, Matt, that he doesn't need to give the losers an inspirational speech. He doesn't need to persuade them. He just says, "Get rocks, something's about to happen."
Yep.
And he does it, and then they just one by one follow suit.
God, what a moment, man.
Yeah.
God, I know there have been two adaptations of this story, and I feel like everybody who makes this story, this is the scene where they decide they're going to do a film adaptation, because you could just see it, you know?
Uh-huh, uh-huh. And of course, something does happen, Matt. It's the apocalyptic rock fight. This is so cool. It's
Yeah.
so cool. We've got 700 pages of terror being put upon these kids by this group, and it is as if all of the anger and anxiety and rage at this terror that these people have ruled their lives with is out in this one final moment where they have a battle, and it's a full-blown battle. The way King writes this is not, kids throwing rocks at each other. It's war,
Yeah.
and it makes it so fun to read.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all have a visceral sense of the danger, and injury potential of just a rock being thrown.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Um, and
And there are
uh,
also explosives in the
there's
in the mix.
explosives, there's collisions, there's yeah, no, it's incredibly intense.
Yeah.
We do have the situation where we kind of know who's going to make it out alive, obviously, but that doesn't really make it much less intense.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah. I particularly love like Ben tennis swinging the M80 back at Henry.
Yeah,
And I also love the moment where Bill like just stands up and basically just walks down Victor Chris. Like
yeah,
he's chucking rocks at him as he walks, and he's not even flinching to that. It's just such a great fucking moment.
I know, I love it. And
Finally, finally
yeah,
the battle comes to an end. Bill says, "If you won't, we're going to move in on you. I think the 6 of us can put you in the hospital." 7, Mike Hanlon said, and joined them. He had a softball-sized rock in each hand. "Just try me, Bowers. I'd love to." Fuck yeah.
softball size rock. It's like, because that's like, I'm gonna kill you, you know.
Yeah,
uh, yeah, I mean,
big fucking
it's.
rock.
I mean, it makes a difference, right? Like saying different characters have like handfuls of rocks. It's like, okay, well, 11-year-old can only fit so many rocks in a hand, whereas
Mhm.
just one giant softball sized rock in each hand, that's a different story.
Yeah.
Um, it's great. I begin to see why this is your favorite book, Scott.
You begin to see? You begin to see?
I thoroughly see why this is your favorite book. I
Yeah.
should say.
What a see. The rock fight. I love it. I love it. There's not too much to analyze here, which is why we've kind of gone through it relatively quickly. But I just want to emphasize again that this is the moment, man. This is the moment.
Yeah,
Like it's all of our losers coming together for the first time. It's working out the feelings that they have towards this bully and his gang, and it's just fantastically well done. I love
yeah,
it.
sure. Yeah. Sometimes you just got to let the crescendo stand on its own and sing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So our chapter ends with this. Bill looked from Mike to Richie. Richie met his eyes, and Bill seemed almost to hear the click, some final part fitting neatly into a machine of unknown intent. He felt ice chips scatter up his back. We're all together now, he thought, and the idea was so strong, so right, that for a moment he thought he might have spoken it aloud. But of course there was no need to speak it aloud. He could see it in Richie's eyes, in Ben's, in Eddie's, in Beverly's, in Stan's. We're all together now, he thought again. Oh God, help us. Now it really starts. Please, God, help us. What's your name, kid? Beverly asked. Mike Hanlon. You want to shoot off some firecrackers? Stan asked, and Mike's grin was answer enough. So,
Uh,
like, again, this is like the dichotomy of children, right? The
yeah,
duality of children,
yeah,
that in the middle of this incredibly adult, this is what we were meant to do. We are here. We have been summoned together, and we're here together. We're all feeling it, and it's exciting, but it's terrifying. And then, but what do we punctuate the ending of the chapter with? How are they actually going to come together? Hey, you wanna shoot some firecrackers with us?
yeah. And I
Wonderful.
love that it's that when like the firecrackers were involved in the violent altercation they just had, and yet they're just
Yeah,
like, hey, they're toys now. They're toys again.
yeah. Well,
Yeah,
that's what we were here to do. We were here to shoot off firecrackers, so
yeah.
we're gonna do it.
I love it.
And that is the end of chapter 13, the apocalyptic rock fight, and the end of our reading for the week. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. What a chapter.
Yeah,
Oh,
So
Love
much
it.
fun.
Yeah. Next week we will continue with chapters 14 and 15. These are titled not as perhaps exciting as the apocalyptic rock fight, but perhaps intriguing. Our chapter titles are The Album and The Smoke Hole. What do you think about those, Matt?
Well, the album reminds me of the photo album. The
Okay.
smoke hole, I don't know what that is actually.
Well, it's a hole with smoke in it.
It's, or the smoke comes out of, or the smoke goes into.
Why would
You
you
don't know.
why would you want smoke to go in a hole?
Maybe it's like a vent fan in a kitchen, huh? Ever think of that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, it's a stupid idea. You're right.
We'll find out if the smoke hole is a vent fan in a kitchen next week. But before we go for the week, we have to talk about last week's discussion question, which was what, Matt?
What was your favorite moment of a character acting on raw intuition? All right, let's get into it. So first of
Let's
all,
do it.
from Aqua Lungfish, if we're including following the guiding hand of Ka in the definition of intuition, then we really have to give some time to talking about the Force. Star Wars is filled with instances of people following the subtle nudges of the Force to make a decision, even people who aren't Force sensitive. Was Han dumping his cargo before the start of A New Hope purely a snap decision, or was the Force trying to get him to Tatooine? But the argument is often made that every moment of intuition is somehow force related. There's probably hundreds of examples, but I'll just go with a few big ones from Luke. Probably the most well known instance was the ending of A New Hope, turning off the targeting computer for the final Death Star run. Every logical voice from both inside him and out told him that it was a terrible idea, but his intuition, the Force, through the voice of Obi-Wan, told him that he had to do it. In Empire Strikes Back, Luke decided to take his lightsaber into the evil cave on Dagobah against Yoda's direction. This is definitely a time when intuition backfires because his test was to face the darkness without an obvious defense and trust in the Force to protect him. Instead, he gets an ominous vision of a possible future, which stacks onto several other events to cause him to make a rash decision in the end, nearly costing him his life. Finally, in Return of the Jedi, Luke follows his feelings, telling him to go to Vader and not to fight, leading him directly to the one person who needs to be defeated in order to win the war, the Emperor, and allowing him to be in a position to succeed at both that as well as redeeming his father. Yeah, that's as long as we talk specifically about the original trilogy, kind of using the Force as a guide, and your willingness to sort of surrender yourself to that, I think, is definitely portrayed as the thing to do and the thing that leads to Luke's source of strength. Yeah,
I do think it's a really interesting observation here that like force-led intuition is something that can be very helpful, but the issue here is knowing when to trust your intuition and not. Like the dichotomy between Luke wrongly bringing his lightsaber in Empire Strikes Back, but then correctly believing that his father could be redeemed despite, you know, basically everyone, and I think even Obi-Wan telling him no. I think
yeah,
that's really fascinating.
yeah. Me too. I agree that is a cool through line.
Man, my favorite thing about Star Wars is that they just made those first 3 movies and then did nothing at all
Yeah.
until last year where they released the show called Andor.
Scott, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said.
Next, we have TN Bugdoc, who says best intuition moment is Val and Earl's standoff with the final graboid in Tremors. Calling back to a bit of foreshadowing from the movie's opening scene, Val runs in the opposite direction of what everyone expects and then seemingly wastes their last explosive by throwing it behind the pursuing Deathworm. The ensuing stampede propels the monster through the side of a cliff and down to its death below, saving the survivors with a superb bit of intuition.
Love it.
I
For
didn't think
some
we'd get a
reason,
Tremors reference, but
yeah,
I'm for it.
always accepting of Tremors references. For some reason, I was thinking of the scene where it burst through the wall of the basement into the armory. So, the intuition there was the intuition to collect hundreds and hundreds of giant guns and keep them loaded on your walls at all times. That was another important intuition.
So you're saying the preppers have got it all figured out.
Well, when there's graboids involved, I think graboids are really a more persuasive argument for prepping than anything else I can think of.
You know what's weird?
Uh-huh.
I always forget that you're like really, really like Tremors. And it always seems not like incongruous with who I know you are, but
Uh-huh.
like just a little bit outside of the graph of your interests that I would expect.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why that is.
That is kind of, I don't know what to do with that, but I'll take it. Yeah. It's just a great movie.
It is. I
I guess
agree.
because I don't normally like scary things, maybe, and it's kind of
Yeah,
scary.
maybe that's
Maybe.
it. I don't know. I don't know.
All right, the Grokkin dude says it's got to be Paul Atreides, right? Muad'Dib. Sure, he eventually is relying on prescience, but everything starts with his ability to learn. He shall know our ways without being taught. Before even being told, he already knows about the stillsuit, the thigh pads, the moisture collection. Fuck. Thanks for that, Frank. Thanks a lot. Um, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I don't think this contradicts anything you're saying here, but I always sort of saw his intuitive familiarity with the still suit and so forth as like the beginning glimmers of his prescience starting up without him necessarily
Mhm.
realizing that's what it was.
Sure.
Um, but yeah,
But
who knows?
is that a good thing?
Uh, not really. No, pretty much no. Yeah,
Find out this fall in Dune Part 2.
yeah. No spoils.
Do you think they're going to move that movie? What if they move that movie because of the strikes?
I have no idea. I kind of thought they were done with all the filming and everything, but who knows? Maybe they were going to do
Yeah, but they might
reshoots.
be afraid that they can't promote it,
Yeah,
and
maybe. That's a
maybe
good
they
point.
don't feel they need the actors to promote Dune Part 2. I don't know.
Yeah, they don't have any big name actors in Dune, do they?
Well, okay, they
As in,
do, but like
I
I'm
know.
just saying maybe Dune is big enough to where they don't need them.
You're making me real nervous, Scott. I don't like it.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Next up, we have Baby Can You Dig Your Sam, who says, I've got to go with John Locke and ABC's Lost. Locke is a man of faith, driven purely by his sense of intuition. His intuition tells him to open the hatch, to push the button, to stop pushing the button, trust his dad. Again, trust Ben, stop the freighter from getting to the island, and so forth. And his intuition is colossally horrible. I'm so glad you said that, Sam, because I was like, ooh.
Uh-huh.
He's almost always wrong, but he continues to go with his gut in the face of rational argument, mostly because the one thing that centers the character is the unwavering belief that he is special. He must be special. The island chose him. He makes decisions based on his gut and is relentless in pursuing it through, without regard to anyone else. Love this character. Love Terry O'Quinn, who played him with such power and fragility. In the end, Locke wasn't special at all, just a pawn in someone else's game. One of the best tragic characters ever created. I agree.
So so mean. They're so mean to Locke. Poor
He
Locke.
deserves it.
He's just a poor guy. He's just a poor man.
Yeah.
Leave Locke alone.
No, I'm
Um,
beginning to think that you don't like the show for the reason we talked about on Rashomon last week, which is just you don't like it when things make you sad.
that might be part of it, Scott. It might be the case that I watched this show when I was ages like 18 to 20 or something and was an idiot. Who knows? Not me.
Well, there's only one way to find out.
Just
Do a
never
podcast on
never
it.
think about it again.
It's the only way.
BC Johnson says this might be stretching the meaning of raw intuition, but in Spider-Man No Way Home, there's an amazing scene where Peter's spider sense is going off like crazy, but he's in a room full of villains and semi-villains and has to figure out where the danger is coming from. It's a super tense scene, and Peter looks absolutely terrified, but resolute as he walks around the apartment, closely examining every character in the room. Then he suddenly webs Norman's hand to the glass, and Norman flashes that big Willem Dafoe creeper smile. And everything is about to go royally upside down in the best way. Yeah.
That's great. I love it.
Yeah, no, I like that too because it is actually like a 3-movie buildup to
Mm-hmm.
him actually learning to use his spider sense properly. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's good.
Do you know I've recently heard that there's like this new movement that says that this was actually a bad movie, and I
Huh.
find that entirely unacceptable.
Yeah. I mean, I've only watched it the one time, but I think we liked it quite a lot, and I still think that it was good, and
Yep.
I thought all of the, fan servicey things that it did were done in the way that it actually works and makes the movie better instead of just being
Yeah.
there to yeah, I liked it.
I do. I will say I think the action filming is some of the worst in the MCU. I think the camera work on the action sequence in this movie it's just awful. It's just not good action.
Especially the last fight, yeah, I agree with
Yeah.
that.
Next we have Fried Lock 68, who says the scene in Goodfellas where Lorraine Bracco meets with Robert De Niro for the last time. He gives her some money and tells her he has some designer dresses for her. The only catch is she has to walk down the street towards a sketchy storefront next to a dark alley to get them, while he stands and watches from a distance. The scene is meant to be ambiguous about his intentions, but the fact that De Niro is constantly checking his surroundings, along with the not so subtle symbolism in the form of street signs, "Don't walk" and "one way," makes it pretty clear that Karen would have been reduced to gabagool if she hadn't fled. For the one and only time in the movie, her instincts cause her to do the right thing. Although, I guess she also deserves credit for flushing the coke down the toilet.
um, Forgot about this scene, but yes.
Yes, I did too. For some reason, I don't think about that scene with Lorraine Bracco. I think of the flushing the coke down the toilet scene because it's her just killing it. I love that movie.
Yeah, there's a lot of I think mobster movies have a lot of intuition scenes actually where it'll be like, yeah, come down and have a drink with us at the thing, and then like it's obvious that there's going to be a hit, and then the character either correctly deduces this and doesn't go, or not.
Mm-hmm.
That's a common trope of mobster film.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right.
All right, Joe Klassen says my answer for the discussion question would be Jason Bourne in the first movie slash book. Waking up, he doesn't only know where he is nor who he is, all the while being hunted by other assassins. Throughout the story, he must rely on pure instinct to navigate his surroundings and piece together who he is. Man, that's a fun movie.
Yeah, I need to rewatch that movie. What a good movie.
Yeah, and it's like a fun movie for that reason because
Mm-hmm.
it very firmly puts you on the side of this character, and then you really want him to like trust his intuition, and he does. So yeah, it's a
Totally.
that's why this is a fun question, a fun discussion question, because I think it hones in on a particular storytelling device that really makes you invested.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I need to revisit that now.
Yep.
Too many movies to watch.
Yep.
Blue Chambray Panties, which will always continue to be my favorite username, says spoilers for The Last Airbender, but if you haven't seen it by now, what are you even doing? Okay, so you've all been warned, so don't get mad at me because I'm about to read some series finale spoilers from The Last Airbender.
Uh-huh.
One of the great moments in The Last Airbender is when Aang, the last Airbender, and Avatar, enters the Avatar state during his battle with Fire Lord Ozai in the series finale. In this powerful moment, Aang's intuition and connection to his past lives come together, unlocking immense power and wisdom. Drawing on that power, Aang's intuitive understanding of energy bending leads him to remove Ozai's firebending abilities without resorting to violence. This moment not only showcases Aang's growth as a character, but also emphasizes the importance of intuition, compassion, and finding alternative solutions in the face of conflict. No, Scott, it is not an anime. Yeah, it is. It's totally an anime.
And then Zuko and Katara ended up together, and everybody lived happily ever after.
Oh, sorry, I pronounced the character's name wrong. It's actually Ong. Sorry about that, folks.
Yeah. Sorry, you got to reference the primary sources when you do these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will relent that Avatar is not an anime only because it allows me to say that I hate all anime, all of it.
See, I thought that made more sense actually. I was kind of thinking that you would get there. All right,
but come on, look at the show. It's an anime. What does anime mean if Avatar is not an anime?
Let's be honest, Scott. It looks better than anime. Let's be honest.
Got him.
All right, Pear Jane says, I'm going with Animal in Muppets Most Wanted. While eventually most of the Muppets expected that Kermit wasn't quite himself, i.e. living in the Siberian gulag while lookalike frog Constantine blazes a trail of robberies across Europe, only Animal says from the start, bad frog. He's not fooled by the green makeup on Constantine's trademark mole. Always trust the drummer.
It's a great, it's a great, it's a great Pear Jane answer. I don't even know if I've seen this movie. I know what movie you're talking about because I saw the trailers, but I don't think I've ever seen Muppets Most Wanted.
No, I don't even know about it. I haven't even seen the trailers. I'm sorry. This is one of the blind spots. I guess we need to put this on our list.
Well, I think because they like reboot the Muppet movies recently. No, so yeah, in 2007 they rebooted the Muppets, and that one that had Jason Segel in it, and Emily Blunt, and it was like a huge hit. And I'm pretty sure the song in it won the Oscar for best song because that's how Brint from Flight of the Conchords got an Oscar. And then they came out with a sequel a few years later, which is Muppets Most Wanted, and I don't think it did as well at all.
What was I doing in 2014? Because I don't remember this at all.
Not watching Muppets, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. Do
you remember the Muppets Treasure Island?
I do remember that.
Man, Tim Curry. Great shit.
Yeah, incredible.
All right. That is going to do it for last week's question. Matt, what is next week's question going to be?
What's your favorite example of kid combat?
Yeah, kids fighting kids.
Yep. Intra-kid violence. Could be fun. Could be scary.
Mm-hmm.
Could be whatever.
Fun and scary?
I can think of, that's even better. I can think of a lot of examples of this. So tell us your favorite.
All I'm thinking of right now, Matt, is Elijah Wood and Macaulay Culkin in The Good Son.
That's a good example. That's on the scary side. That's way over on the scary side, just FYI.
I think that movie changed me. It came out in 1993. I was 8 years old, and I watched this movie with the fun guy from Home Alone, and a lot happens. A lot goes down in that one.
Yeah, no matter what you think you're getting into, it's not quite that.
Yeah. What a wild movie to make in 1993.
Yeah, what a fascinating concept to be like, Macaulay Culkin's on a good run. You know what we need to do to his career?
Do you think because if an adult did this, you would be like, oh, that's a really interesting career move to try to not get typecast. But does he have that much control over his career at 11 years old?
I doubt it. So strange.
How did we the random segues we take? I never thought I'd be talking about The Good Son. I want to do an episode on The Good Son now. That movie fucked my brain up.
Yeah, okay. Sure.
Anyway, let us know your favorite moment of child violence. That's going to do it for us here on Kingslingers this week. Next week, as we said, we continue with chapters 14 and 15. Oh, we got to find out what that smoke hole is, Matt. I can't wait.
Yeah. Somebody's going to be cooking in the kitchen. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, on X at kingslingerspod, and at r/doofmedia on the subreddit.
Stop it.
I mean,
when I go to it, it still says twitter.com. So that's what I'm going to keep calling it.
Well, I'll probably just switch back and forth randomly from now on.
If you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so you never miss a single solitary episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You know what? All the places. You're there. Yep. You can find us there.
Yep. And you can support us at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patrons Jason T, Katie K, and Glenn N. We really appreciate your support. You can go vote for the fan art contest, fan fiction, whatever we're calling it. Do the King Thing contest over there. And of course, you can enjoy our Patreon exclusive bonus podcast.
Yeah. Of course, if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay. You can always help us out by sharing this podcast with all of your Stephen King loving friends, or just randomly on X, I guess is what we call it. Also, you can help us out by leaving a rating and a review. This week's spotlight review comes from Emmy3212, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Loving it with you both. Matt, please check out It narrator Steven Weber's 1997 TV starring role." Emmy, it sounds like, doesn't know that you've watched many times Steven Weber's 1997 TV starring role. Which is what, Matt? Pop quiz. What is Emmy talking about here?
Definitely talking about.
You're Googling it. I can tell right now you're cheating.
Oh, is the Shining miniseries?
Yes. Yes.
I totally got that.
We did an episode of Other Levels of the Tower on Steven Weber's The Shining.
I didn't realize that was him. So thank you. I mean, honestly, thank you for pointing out, because we did watch that and I didn't recognize his voice.
Oh, really? I thought we had talked about this before. Sorry, that's my bad.
I mean, maybe you said his name and I like nodded and pretended that I understood what you were referencing. But yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, you've talked favorably about Weber's performance on the audiobook a few times throughout this this whole conversation. And I think it is like one of the, like, when people talk about it, they end up talking about his reading of it a lot. So it's pretty well regarded.
Yeah, it's very strong, and he goes big when he needs to, which a lot of audiobook readers don't. And I like it. I like the way he does it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Emmy. You provided a service to us today in multiple ways, so we appreciate that. And thank you to everyone who keeps sending in those rating and reviews. We are skyrocketing past 500 reviews right now, and it's a very, very good feeling. It does help us. We're charting on Apple Podcasts, and I think part of that is the reviews. So thanks. We're charting. We're on a chart.
We're on the charts. On the chart finally. Yeah.
We did it. We've made it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, folks, we'll see you back here next week for part 10, going double digits now, of Stephen King's It. Long days and pleasant nights.
And that you have twice the number.